Hello everybody, a very good morning. 7 o'clock on today's programme for you. Talking to the Culture Secretary, that's Lucy Frazer. Plus, we talk to Labour mayors staging an intervention over HS2 today, including Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham. Join us from 9:30 for that one. And wild weather heading into the UK. We'll tell you all about that and where. It's Wednesday, the 27th of September. School absences. Sky News investigates as MPs have warned mental health support for children is grossly inadequate. More than 100 wedding guests killed in a fire during the bride and groom's first dance. Were fireworks to blame? Plea to the Prime Minister. 5 Labour mayors clubbed together to demand the northern leg of HS2 goes ahead. Will he listen? Why thousands of women in the UK are dying unnecessarily from preventable cancers every year. A court rules that Donald Trump committed fraud for years while building his real estate empire. So Mick Jagger reveals who might benefit from the Stones' back catalogue sale. Hello everyone. The number of children absent from school has more than doubled since the pandemic. MPs say the government isn't acting fast enough to stop the harm this is causing. Let's get more, should we, from Nick, who has been looking into this for us. Hi, Nick. This is an investigation you've been doing for some time, isn't it? Tell us more.
Well, today, an influential committee of MPs, the Education Select Committee, have published a report and, you know, make no mistake about it, it is very critical of the government's efforts, or lack of efforts actually, to bring these absence rates down. We've spoken about this a lot, haven't we?
We have.
After the pandemic, absence rates started to soar. 1.7 million children last year were persistently absent. That meant they lost more than 10% of school. 125,000 spent more time out of school than in it. And the findings of this report today actually tally with a lot of what we've been reporting. And the headlines are that there is a huge mental health crisis in our schools now involving a lot of children, and that the government response to that is, in the words of the report, grossly inadequate. So we went up to Cumbria, to Barrow and Furness, to one school that is actually trying its best to help its children get into school and get over their mental health problems.
I felt like I was just one of the, like, non-smart kids of school, and I thought I was just useless.
For these school children, speaking openly can feel like a mountain to climb.
Don't really do anything social.
No.
So I normally just stay in my room most of the time.
Yeah.
We've been allowed into these special sessions designed to get to the heart of how children feel about their mental health and how it impacts their education.
Other people target little things about you that they think will get you down, and they do it on purpose, and that really stops me from getting into school sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I've been a target of that a lot.
This pilot, run in conjunction with Westmoreland and Furness Council, Furness Academy and the charity Family Action, has improved attendance for all of these children, but sessions like these are rare.
Seeing this kind of session up close really hits home the amount of work that has to be done to tackle what is a national crisis in low attendance. This is intensive, it's bespoke, but there are now calls for the government to support more projects like this one, to roll out on a national scale.
A report by an influential committee of cross-party MPs is very critical of the government's efforts to drive down absence rates, which are double pre-pandemic levels. Mental health support for pupils is, they say, grossly inadequate. And crucially, there has been no significant improvement in the speed and scale of reducing absence rates. Lindsay Stanway has taught here at Furness Academy for 28 years.
How worried are you about the lost learning that's going on?
Really worried. So the kids that struggled through COVID, you're trying to pick up the, improve their resilience, you're trying to improve their social skills, you're trying to do catch up on maths and English that they've missed. And if we don't do something quickly, it's going to become the new norm, and that's not going to be good for anybody.
The committee says the government needs to act with more urgency to prevent long-term harm to children. But it's clear that COVID still casts a long shadow over the education of millions of children.
So the worry here, Kay, is that as we head into a general election, where, as you know, we have the big fanfare of the big debates about health, cost of living, law and order, teaching leaders are worried now that this very important issue could start to be drowned out by the fanfare of a general election. And that's really worrying, and that could, they say, be disastrous for the thousands of children who are slowly disappearing from school. And they have that name, ghost children, an unfortunate name, but it does mean that they're slowly disappearing, and that's worrying for everyone.
Put that to the Minister when she's joining us, Lucy Frazer, Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, which is quite the title, isn't it? She's joining us in about 15 minutes. I'll ask her about it then. For now, thanks very much. And we'll have more on that story in a little while when we hear from the chair of the Education Select Committee. That's Robin Walker. That's at 7:45 this morning. Our other main story, and more than 100 people have died at a wedding in Iraq after a fire started during the bride and groom's first dance. It's been reported that fireworks were lit during the celebrations. 150 others were injured at the event, which had around 900 guests. The wedding was in a predominantly Christian area around 200 miles northwest of the capital, Baghdad, in Nineveh. Let's get more, should we, from Alistair.
There were hundreds of people inside the wedding hall when burning pieces of the ceiling started falling down on them. The fire took hold very quickly, trapping many inside. There has been no official word yet on the cause, but Iraqi state media have reported that fireworks lit during the celebrations could have been responsible. The injured were rushed to hospitals around the region. More than 150 needed treatment. As firefighters combed through what was left of the burnt-out building, looking for survivors, but more likely, more bodies. This was filmed shortly before the fire started, a video of the bride and groom enjoying their first moments of marriage. They have been named as Haneen and Ravan.
They were about to do a slow dance, and then they lit up this thing for the dance, which then caught fire.
There were over 800 or 900 people inside the hall, and the entire place was on fire in seconds, says this man.
I came here to the hospital and I was told that 22 members of my family are burned. So I came here and searched for them. Once I found them, they were transferred to Mosul because their condition was critical.
Iraq's Prime Minister has ordered an investigation into the fire and asked his government to provide all the help that's needed. The country's health ministry described what happened as an unfortunate accident and has warned that the number of dead could rise further.
Well, Alistair's with us now. Hi, Alistair. Suggestions that the cladding on this building, which was illegal, contributed to the death toll. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, this is a report that's coming out from some Iraqi officials. I think the context to this is Nineveh province, where the fire happened, is a predominantly Christian area of northern Iraq and was the subject of a lot of violent attacks by Islamic State a number of years ago, particularly against some churches in the area. So the rebuilt wedding halls, at least the suggestion is that they have been built not according to official Iraqi building standards, and some of the materials used might have been incredibly flammable. I mean, that's not yet confirmed, but it would at least perhaps explain why the fire seemed to rip through the wedding hall so quickly. As for the bride and groom, there had been mixed reports about whether or not they had died, but one of their friends, a close friend, said they had spoken to them in recent hours and they are both safe. They both managed to escape via a kitchen door.
Absolutely devastated to what happened to some of their guests. Alistair, for now, thank you. At home, 5 Labour mayors will appeal directly to the PM over HS2 today. Fraser has more for us in Leeds. Hi, Frazer, who are they and what are they saying?
Good morning, Kay. Yeah, they'll be meeting here in Leeds. Rather ironic in that the Leeds part of the HS2 scheme was scrapped some time ago. This is all about rising costs, according to the government, according to rumours that are coming out that the government are looking to wind back or delay or cancel altogether the leg from Birmingham to Manchester. £30 billion was the original estimate for completing HS2. That was made back in 2010. It's now over £100 billion and still rising, and that's prompted rumours in the past few days that the Prime Minister is going to scale it back or pull out altogether. We heard from a Home Office Minister yesterday saying no plans have been made to delay it or to postpone it, but the Prime Minister has remained quiet on this. He hasn't been giving anyone any hopes that these rumours aren't true. So today here in Leeds, 5 Labour mayors from West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Liverpool, Manchester and Sadiq Khan from London will be meeting here to call for full funding of HS2, full completion of HS2 and of the Northern Powerhouse rail scheme as well. They'll be meeting at 9:30 and we'll be talking to them here on Sky News Breakfast shortly after that.
OK, for now, thank you. As we're hearing, from those Labour mayors, 5 in total, as we were just seeing Fraser telling us that we are going to be hearing from them at 9:30 this morning or thereabouts. Looking at some of the headlines for you now here on Sky News. On The Breakfast Show Wednesday morning, a court has found that Donald Trump committed fraud for years. That's what we're hearing. While building his real estate empire. The civil lawsuit brought by New York's Attorney General found that the former president and his company deceived banks and insurers by massively overvaluing assets and exaggerating his net worth on paperwork. British Airways has said safety is always its top priority following reports that a pilot took cocaine before trying to fly a plane from South Africa to London last month. The airline says the matter was referred to the Civil Aviation Authority and the individual no longer works for them, aka he's been sacked. There's a warning that data breaches are putting survivors of domestic abuse at risk. The Information Commissioner's Office has reprimanded 7 organisations, including a law firm, an NHS trust and a government department in the last 14 months for allowing information about breaches that could have put victims at further risk of harm. David Walliams is suing the production company behind Britain's Got Talent. The ITV show he appeared on as a judge for a decade. The case is listed as dealing with data protection. No further details have been provided. It follows his departure from the programme after a leaked transcript showed the star making offensive off-air comments about contestants, including a pensioner. This image here is when he swam the length of the Thames. Police are relaunching an appeal for information about the murder of the university graduate Melanie Hall, who disappeared nearly 30 years ago. The then 25-year-old was last seen at a nightclub in Bath in 1996. Her remains were then found 13 years later by workmen on the M5 motorway. Detectives hope to discover one small piece of evidence to help solve the case. The number of people killed in an explosion in Nagorno-Karabakh has risen to 68. The blast happened at a fuel depot near the regional capital as people who were trying to flee the disputed region lined up for fuel. More than 28,000 ethnic Armenians have crossed into Armenia, saying they fear ethnic cleansing after Azerbaijan seized control of the region last week. 2 people have been arrested over the disappearance of a teenage boy 21 years ago. Robert Williams was 15 years old when he went missing from his home in South Wales in March of 2002. A 59-year-old woman and a 35-year-old man were arrested yesterday and have been bailed while police investigate. Still to come on the programme for you, hearing from a group supporting LGBT+ refugees after the Home Secretary said being gay isn't enough to qualify as an asylum seeker. Painting a portrait of everyone in a city. We'll be talking to the artist looking to complete the challenge. That's at 8:45. And claim and counterclaim in the Ukraine war surrounding the death of a Russian commander. We'll be joined in the studio by the Ukrainian MP Kira Roddick at 9:20. New report on cancer you've got more for us this morning. Good morning, Siobhan.
I do. Good morning, Kate. It's nice to see you.
And you too.
Well, this is one of the largest studies of its kind which has been published in The Lancet this week. It looked at the experiences of around 800,000 women globally in 185 countries. It found that cancer is one of the biggest killers in women, and it ranks the top 3 causes in premature death in almost every country that it studied. And what I thought was quite interesting is that it focused on the fact that women's cancer, in the way that it's termed, was the key focus in women. So things like breast cancer and cervical cancer. But this is despite the fact that lung cancer and colon cancer are actually among the top 3 killers of women around the world. I have some other figures for you as well. The research found that 24,000 women in the UK aged 30 to 69 die from cancer, which can be avoided. 6 in 10 of these cancer deaths could be averted through prevention and earlier diagnosis, and the other 4 in 10 deaths could be avoided through improving access to timely and quality treatment. So these researchers are now calling for what they describe as a feminist approach to dealing with cancer and women. That could be quite confusing, but what they're basically saying is that women aren't currently at the heart of cancer when it comes to treating other women. So, for example, when it comes to policy and research work, there needs to be far more women leading that research and policy work to help other women that are dealing with cancer.
That's interesting. Thanks very much, Siobhan. Thank you. That's on the front page of The Guardian, actually, this morning, saying that health experts are calling for a more feminist approach to cancer to eliminate inequality. As Siobhan was saying, data showing 800,000 women worldwide are dying needlessly every year. The Eye reports that private schools are gearing up to fight plans by Labour, if the party gets into power, to end their exemption from charging VAT on their fees. Same story in the Daily Mail, which claims Labour's class war would begin on day 1 of taking power. Telegraph leads with a report on the effects of COVID lockdown, which concluded that the harm some children suffered was preventable if ministers had thought more at the time about children's rights. Let's talk about that and many other subjects, should we, with Lucy Frazer, Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, representing the government this morning. Hi, it's good to see you. Hi. Report suggesting that you don't care enough about kids not being in school.
We totally care about kids being in school. I care passionately about children being in school. You know, we put record funding into education, you know, an extra over £2 billion for the next 2 years, you know, £1.5 billion COVID catch-up fund. I think education is the heart of what we should be doing as a government and are doing as a government to ensure that we look after, you know, children who are our future.
Not according to this committee. They're saying the figures have hardly budged, and is really very, very critical of the government's approach.
Well, obviously, you're looking back on COVID and the decisions that we made, really difficult decisions at the time. You know, we learned as COVID went on in terms of, you know, getting a vaccine, what we could or couldn't do. But you know, as soon as we had the 1.5 billion pounds.
Minister, it's about getting these kids back to school, and you're not doing enough, is what the report is saying.
Well, there's
COVID was then.
So I know that, you know, this was an issue that was discussed in government at the time, and what we were balancing was people's, you know, the risk to life against other matters.
No.
Well, all these things will be obviously considered in the COVID inquiry, but absolutely the government is committed to education. I'm sure, Kay, you're going to ask me about some of the announcements that I'm making today as Culture Secretary. You're not in the education space, because that's not my job. I'm not Education Secretary.
You said you cared passionately about it.
I do, but I'm the Culture Secretary. So in my job, I'm trying to do what I can do in my department to look after young people. And today and throughout this week, we're going to have a series of announcements on how we can support young people, get somewhere to go, something to do, and someone to talk to. And today we're announcing our Million Hours Fund, which is about getting people in youth clubs more activities, you know, so they get off the streets and do constructive things with their time. We're announcing bursaries for 7,500 children, disadvantaged children, children who are carers, to have outdoor adventures, and a whole series of announcements during this week, all to support young people and their life chances.
Indeed so. Lots of things for when kids are out of school. How are you going to get them back into school?
Well, that's something I know that the Education Secretary has spoken about and that she is very passionate about. And what I can tell you is that we put in £1.5 billion into that tutoring scheme to make sure that those young people got that catch-up provision so that they, were on track. And actually, the figures show that we have, in terms of academic performance, we are pretty much where we were previous to COVID.
What about these coast kids who are not at school and, are spending significant amounts of time, some of them not having been back to school since COVID, even if they were before that? And the Education Committee Chairman, who's going to be on the show very shortly, is going to tell us that the figures are suggesting the government is not doing enough. It's very critical of you.
It's really important that children are educated in school, and we've put in significant funds to do that. As I said, I'm not the Education Secretary, who I know will have lots of plans on that, but even in my department, that's exactly what we are doing. So later in the week, we'll be announcing, a plan for more mentoring, so £15 million going into mentoring. That's exactly the sort of support that children who are not in school would benefit from. And we're also later announcing as well work experience for children.
Okay, fine. OK, we've only got a limited time, Minister. You're not the Home Secretary either, but I'm sure you've got a view on immigration. The debate needs to be had on what should happen as far as the movement of people is concerned. A major rethink about the 1951 Convention is what the Home Secretary was saying to us yesterday. Will the government commit to staying within the UN Refugee Convention?
Well, you talked about the Home Secretary, and she did obviously give a speech yesterday. And what she was saying was that this is uncontrolled illegal immigration is an international problem. It's a global problem that needs global solutions. And you will know that as a government, we're absolutely committed to that. I've already taken steps to do that. So, for example, you will know we've got a historic agreement with France that's stopping people illegally coming over here. You'll know that we've got an agreement, a bilateral agreement with Albania. And as a result of all those measures, those small boat crossings are down 23% as of this time last year.
And in answer to my question?
So what she was talking about was the fact that international agreements are really important. They're part of the bedrock of our international cooperation. But what the Home Secretary was talking about was the fact that when that UN convention in 1951 was formed, it was all about persecution, and immigration was nowhere near the levels that it is today. And what she was talking about was that case law has interpreted the 1951 convention to be a much looser definition. And now what we're getting is economic migrants coming here, as well as those who are suffering persecution. And she was saying that is something that we should be thinking about internationally. And I do think that we need international solutions to these issues.
OK, and in answer to my question?
I think I did answer your question.
No, you didn't.
I think you asked me whether the UN Convention needed looking at.
No, I didn't. I didn't say that.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Oh, well, I'll ask you again. Will the government commit to staying in the UN Refugee Convention, which is what I asked you?
Yes, well, I think that those conventions are really important, but I do think that it is what she was talking about is whether those sorts of conventions should be reformed. And I do think that it is up to all countries to look at whether conventions that were signed a number of years ago are still, as they're interpreted today, whether they're still doing the job that they were enacted to do.
If gay people are being persecuted in their country and fear for their life, should they be allowed to find safe refuge in the UK?
This comes back to the question that you've just asked me about what is the purpose of the 1951 Convention. And when it was first enacted, it was about people who were fearing for their life.
If a gay person is fearing for their life, should they be allowed to find refuge in the UK?
So if someone is fearing, if someone is at a threat of losing their life and is at risk of persecution and being killed, then of course they should be seeking refuge. If they are fearing discrimination, that is different.
Persecution?
I think it is very clear that if someone is being persecuted in terms of they're going to lose their life, then that is what the convention was there for. She was distinguishing between discrimination and fear of discrimination and fearing for your life in terms of persecution.
OK, so somebody from Rwanda could come to the UK and seek refuge here?
I think you will find that the UK believes that Rwanda is a safe country. That is why we've entered into an agreement.
But gay people feel they're being persecuted in Rwanda.
Well, I hope I've been really clear.
Well, you haven't, which is why I'm asking you the question.
That there is a difference. So people, all my great-grandparents, all my grandparents came here fleeing persecution, i.e. they were going to be killed. One came from Nazi Germany, some came from Russia, and they came here and Britain gave them a home. And I'm very proud of that because, you know, we gave people who were otherwise going to be exterminated a home. And there's a difference between that and allowing everybody who fears discrimination across the world, which is hundreds of millions of people.
You're being very emotive. I didn't say that at all. What I said was if somebody is being persecuted or fear of persecution, and whatever that might mean, in a country like Rwanda, should they be allowed to come to a safe haven that is the UK?
Well, you're taking a particular country, which is Rwanda.
I am.
Which, as you know, we believe is a safe country. That is a matter before the courts. Not if you're gay. That is a matter before the courts at the moment, and we believe that we are complying with those UN and international conventions in asking Rwanda to take those people who are coming illegally here.
OK. Final question. How closely will the Prime Minister be listening to what the 5 Labour mayors are saying today? They say failure to deliver HS2 will leave swathes of the north with Victorian transport infrastructure that is unfit for purpose.
I'm sure the Prime Minister and the Chancellor listen to a wide variety of voices, but as you will know, it's the responsibility of the government to keep all projects under consideration. And that's what the Chancellor is doing. He is, as he does on all matters which are spending billions of pounds of taxpayers' funding, is looking at a whole range of projects to make sure that they're value for money.
Is HS2 going to go ahead all the way to Manchester?
Well, that is a decision, as you know, for the Chancellor and not for me.
I seem to know a lot more than you this morning, Minister. You keep telling me how much I know. It's good to see you.
Yeah,
unfortunately, we're out of time. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Agnes will move in today with strong winds and heavy rain, bringing the risk of disruption. Already quite windy in the west, with rain moving across Ireland and Wales. But most other places are fine, with early fog lifting. The rest of the morning will see rain extending across Northern Ireland and other western fringes of Britain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So Agnes is on the move. Jo is here. What's she going to do?
Yep, on the way in at the moment. I mean, outside at the moment is quite still in many places, certainly in the east, certainly this morning coming in quite calm. But the winds will pick up from the west as Storm Agnes moves in. We're going to see the strongest winds across Ireland and the northern and western parts of the UK, whereas the southeast here, it will just probably get a bit blustery. But there are warnings in place. You can see here we've got a wide wind warning covering much of the UK, where we could see gusts 50 to 60 miles per hour, locally more in exposed areas, particularly around the Irish Sea coast. We could see up to 80 miles per hour. And there are some rain warnings as well. We've got rain warnings covering parts of southern Scotland, and there are further warnings covering parts of Ireland as well. They actually have an orange status warning covering parts.
Tell me about this heat wave instead.
Oh, I thought we might get onto
exciting.
that. Yes, I saw that yesterday, that there was some mention of that. I mean, looking ahead, yesterday we got to 24.4 degrees Celsius in the southeast, so that's well above average for the time of year. We'd see something more like 17 or 18 degrees Celsius. So we have got warm conditions, and we'll see that for the next day or two, cooling down tomorrow. But yes, as we go into October, we could see spells where temperatures will be above average. But I think the talk of heat wave, to reach that criteria, we'd need to get 25 Celsius or above, which is very unlikely.
Do the Rolling Stones get you hot under the collar?
A little bit.
OK. Well, I've got something for you. Ooh, Mick Jagger has revealed who might benefit from the Rolling Stones' back catalogue.
You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, it just might find, it just might get what you need.
One of your favourites? Oh, you're swaying along. I like it Wednesday morning. The singer suggested the post-1971 tracks, one of the most prestigious music collections in the world, may be given to charity rather than being sold for a large sum of money. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Mick said his kids don't need $500 million to live well and suggested giving it to charity would do some good in the world. So not only is he hot, he's also got a heart of gold.
Exactly. Lovely.
Yeah? OK. Do you fancy a different song for the next hour?
Oh, I don't know. I'll have a think.
Have a think about it.
I'll have a think.
We like that one, though, don't we?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Lovely to see you. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you, Kay.
Top stories for you on the programme this morning. MPs have warned mental health support for children struggling to attend school is grossly inadequate as the number of absences since the pandemic doubles. The government defended the investment it's made in education. More than 100 people have been killed in a fire at a wedding in northern Iraq, which started during the couple's first dance. They are both safe. 5 Labour mayors, including Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan, are meeting in Leeds this morning to urge the Prime Minister not to cut HS2. Here's a question for you. Is there such a thing as bad publicity? We'll discuss whether negative press is helping to boost Donald Trump's popularity. That to come. And the Golden State goes green with Amsterdam-style cafes set to open in California. And the hunt for the missing artefacts. The British Museum appeals for help finding some of the more than 2,000 treasures thought to have been stolen.
The economy.
Health. Security.
Education.
Immigration.
Stability.
Cost of living. Our futures. Whatever the issues facing you, we want to find out what's really going on in the UK. We will always put people at the heart of the story on the UK Tonight with me, Sarah Jane Mee, on Sky News.
Derna itself has initially had about 30,000 displaced people. So what we mean is people who have actually literally lost their homes and are now staying in temporary shelters. That's gone down to about 20,000, but they've moved out to other areas because Derna is pretty inhospitable at the moment. The infrastructure is very bad there. We were actually told by the Minister of Health when I was there in Derna that they need psychosocial support. The trauma that has been faced not just by the affected populations, but by the hospital staff. So key doctors and nurses lost their lives. Thankfully, Libyan expertise, medical expertise has come in from all over the country, but they're lacking in basic supplies, including fresh water as well. Severe storm, and that affected the north-eastern coast of Libya. I was actually flying in on that day and the airports were closed. It affected the east the most. Benghazi is the second biggest city in Libya. However, in Derna, there were 2 dams that collapsed, and that led to the catastrophic loss of life and displacement of people. You have an internationally recognised government in the west, in Tripoli, the Government of National Unity, and you have another opposing government in the east, Government of National Stability. This moment of tragedy seems to have brought both governments together. So the Government of National Unity has actually established a National Emergency Committee, and the government in the East has put aside funding to really work on providing the resources that are needed. So I think there's a rare moment of coalescence here where the tragedy has brought people together, the people of Libya together.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Now, do you want to know more about Donald Trump this Wednesday morning here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News? OK, I'll tell you. He's committed fraud for years while building the property empire that catapulted him to fame, according to a judge. It's the latest in a series of bad headlines about the former president, including 4 criminal cases that he's now facing. But he continues to perform well in the polls as he campaigns to be the Republican candidate in the upcoming US election. Yesterday on the programme, Lord Archer said negative press is working in President Trump's favour.
And every time he has a problem, his ratings go up 4%. So I would guess he's almost now certain to be the candidate.
Well, Dr. Shola and Scotty are with us. So, Dr. Shola, you should be nice about him, because when you're negative about him, he gets more press, and as a result, he goes up in the polls.
Absolutely not. We need to keep telling the truth about Donald Trump. Look, Kay, we're talking about Trump, who is a narcissistic, mentally inept, morally bankrupt fraud, whose entire personal, business, and political life is built on a pack of lies. Trump once famously said, I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters. And you know what? He's right. Because from a political perspective, Trump's unique selling point is division. He weaponizes racism, sexism, misogyny, and every kind of bigotry for political profit. And his politically illiterate base have bought into his false projection of strength, his lies about his wealth, and even with irrefutable evidence of his corruption and wrongdoing, they excuse his behavior and claim somebody is out to get him. So this twice impeached, twice indicted, one-term president and glorified, insurrectionist weaponizes his political base to undermine U.S. democracy. And this is how the bad publicity helps him. I don't think he's gaining new voters, but he's not losing his existing base. His presidency, quite frankly, is the biggest threat to American democracy. He just did not expect there to be consequences, Kay. That's the problem with Trump. Okay. He thought he was going to keep getting away with this, but all of these federal charges and state charges against him are the consequences that he's not ready for. And you know what?
Okay.
I'm for it.
Scotty, over to you.
You know, honestly, Kay, I guarantee Donald Trump would like to wake up and have a pre-political involvement, presidential type atmosphere within the media. The praises, the love, everything they did with Donald Trump prior to 2015. But starting in 2015, Donald Trump realized that he was going to be the target of everything. And so what he successfully has sold, the narrative he has created, is that he is taking the hits for you, the American people. And every time that they are coming after him, they are the bad guys. Every story needs a villain. Every story needs a superhero. And Donald Trump has been extremely successful since 2015 in showing, telling, and now convincing the American people that he is the superhero and everybody that continuously goes up against him is the villain. But Shola actually proved the point as to why Donald Trump continues to rise in the polls. Because people like Shola, and I love you, Shola, but in this case, you're insulting. It's not like you're insulting just Donald Trump. You're insulting the people that are supporting Donald Trump. And that's why he continues to grow. At this point, it even took the Washington Times, a undoubtedly very liberal left paper, had to admit that Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden by 10 percentage points in their own poll. So it's not just the Trump base. He's gaining the people on the other side, those original people that helped him win in 2016 and did not show up for him in 2020.
And this is why I said politically illiterate base, because to be honest with you, I'm not limiting this to the right or to the left. I'm limiting this to anybody who thinks that
opportunity insulter. That's awesome,
Shola. Wait, hold on a second, Scotty. I'm saying that when I say politically illiterate base, I'm speaking also of those who buy into the lie that by speaking the truth about Trump, we're speaking against you, or that, Trump represents you. Trump does not represent the common man. There's nothing about Donald Trump, his elitism. He is the establishment that speaks for the working person, okay, rather than say working man. So all those who believe the stupid lie, you know what? It is on them. But bottom line is that when it came to the elections, however much Donald Trump seems to be rising in ratings in this last elections, more people voted for Joe Biden than they did for Donald Trump. People voted with their common sense that God gave them. Okay, so I don't care what all the polls are saying. If he does become the next candidate, which is likely because heaven knows that the Republican Party have not exercised any common sense in the last decade, I think the reality is it will boil down to Americans to take, to try to fix this rot that is in the soul of American democracy and speak with their feet and voting rights. I mean
Scotty,
the right way, not
Scotty,
I don't mean like politics.
Okay, Scotty, what would a second term of President Trump look like?
Well, that's what's very interesting about this, because after the last 2 years, 4 years, and all of not only things like the Russian hoax, the collusion hoax that was proven to be false, but this continued targeting of Donald Trump with the DOJ, with the different investigations, with the different states attorney general, I can promise you the first thing he is going to do, which is what he should have done in 2016, is he's going to go in and he's going to clean house as much as the Republicans in Congress will let him do. They're going to clean out all of the bureaucracies that have just built up over decades in Washington, D.C., because he's realized that he has been a target of it. And that's exactly going to be the mandate that the American people on both sides of the aisle are going to send. They are tired of the targeting, where we're spending more money targeting American citizens, and we're actually supporting the criminals in this country rather than supporting the legal citizens. And unlike Shola, I'm not going to insult those that would vote for Joe Biden. I would never, ever insult them, because at least they're getting out and voting. I'm actually going to say, just pay more attention to what's going on. Think for yourself, and don't just listen to pundits like Shola and I. Do your own research. I'm not going to insult you. That's the difference between the two.
May I add something? Because you see, Scotty, yeah, I love you too, but you're absolutely wrong. How can you possibly know what Trump is going to do in his second term when he spent his entire campaign being charged, being in court, talking absolute nonsense, from windfalls, windmills, coming up with all kinds of stupid conspiracies, being charged and being found liable for sexual assault. This guy has not stated.
What has Biden done? What in office? What policies has Biden actually done?
Presidency might look like. But what we do know, Scotty, what we do know is this. As soon as Donald Trump gets in there, he's going to pardon himself. As soon as Donald Trump gets in there, the very systems and the offices you say he's going to wipe clean, you have to understand that he's going to cement it and solidify it to protect him. Because that's all he does. He only thinks about himself. I mean, look at all the people that have gone to prison.
This is very interesting coming
for
from
January
the party that
he's done nothing for them.
Who's been getting dismissed in every court, who has Joe Biden himself. I mean, it's very interesting right now. See, you could have made that argument, Shola, a few weeks ago, a few months ago, but now there's actually an active impeachment investigation, an inquiry into Joe Biden. So I'd be very careful about considering that impeachment term on Donald Trump when Joe Biden's now found himself in the middle of it.
Stop deflecting, stop distracting. We are talking about Donald Trump. I mean, when we get to the so-called impeachment of Joe Biden, let's have that conversation then. But
ladies,
but right now, we're talking about Donald J. Trump
of time. Yep, we're out of time. I've missed you both. Please come back again very soon. It's great to see you. Thank you. They're fantastic telly, aren't they? Now, and they both make good points. The British Museum has released images of missing items in an attempt to recover them. The museum is asking the public to help identify and recover the treasures believed to have been stolen from their collection. An estimated 2,000 artefacts had been taken over a significant period of time, we're told, with the majority being from its gems and jewellery collection, including gold rings and bracelets from Greece and Rome. Still to come, how Amsterdam-style cannabis cafes could become common in California. And your chance to taste one of the world's oldest whiskies. Full details of how you can get hold of it after the break.
big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Hello again. Ghost children, what are they? What's the government doing about it? Talking about it shortly. Before that, so-called cannabis cafes are a fixture of daily life in Amsterdam, but they could soon find a home in California. Why? Let's find out more.
Venice Beach in California is synonymous with surf and skate culture. But wander these streets and you're also hit by the often overwhelming smell of cannabis. Since the drug known as weed was legalised here in 2016, this has become a popular place to smoke. But California is now on the brink of bringing in an Amsterdam-style law. It will allow people to smoke inside cafes and restaurants here. Campaigners say it will reduce black market sales and boost legitimate business.
If alcohol can be passed, then we should be able to have cannabis as well.
This cafe is a blueprint for how things could look, although the food here is from an outside supplier, so the business doesn't benefit from sales at the moment.
Up until now, it's like still taboo to smoke anywhere else outside of your home in places that it's legal. So to do it in an open setting, again, where you have something like food next to it, where it's kind of like making it okay. Like if I'm eating, I can have a joint just like I could have a cocktail. It's making it a little bit, like I said, more normalized.
Proposed changes to the law would allow cannabis dispensaries like this one to sell food and non-alcoholic drinks and host live performances.
It will be one of the most transformational changes to how the cannabis industry operates in our state in 20 or 30 years.
Assembly member Matt Haney wrote the Cannabis Cafe bill.
And what we've seen from places like Amsterdam and other places around the world is that people want to consume cannabis with their friends, safely, legally, and right now they're prohibited from doing that. That's a huge missed opportunity for this industry and for the residents of our state who want to experience this culture, build this culture, bring in tourism.
The cannabis industry is worth more than $5 billion a year to California, but advocates from the American Cancer Society oppose people smoking cannabis in public places.
People see this as this fun new recreational thing. They see it like alcohol, right? That it's just something harmless that we can go do and it doesn't impact anyone else, but it does impact other people when you are smoking it. The people who are working the restaurant who didn't necessarily sign up to smoke weed are now going to have the impacts of secondhand smoke.
Despite the resistance, the California governor is expected to pass this bill in the next few days. It will come into effect at the start of next year, making scenes like this common here. Martha Kellner, Sky News in Los Angeles.
Let's talk about schools again, should we? With our panel, who you'll recognise, of course. Talk to me about what you thought of what the Minister had to say.
Well, it's clear that when you talk to the government in general, they about why absence levels are so low, they say they've got a plan, they say they're working to sort it out, but the Select Committee report says otherwise. They say there's actually been a wholesale lack of progress. And I think hearing from the Minister today was a bit disappointing, actually, to hear sort of a lack of depth and detail and a recognition of the problem. She's the Minister for Culture, Media and Sport, involving thousands of children, Kay, across the country and engaging them probably most likely in their school. So to not really have a grasp of what the government are trying to do about absence, I think, was kind of revealing in a way.
To that end, this is what she said.
I care passionately about children being in school. You know, we put record funding into education, you know, an extra over £2 billion for the next 2 years, you know, £1.5 billion COVID catch-up fund.
Minister, it's about getting these kids back to school and you're not doing enough, is what the report is saying.
Well, there's
OK,
a
COVID was then.
So I know that, you know, this was an issue that was discussed in government at the time, and what we were balancing was people's, you know, the risk to life against other matters.
No.
Well, all these things will be obviously considered in the COVID inquiry, but absolutely the government is committed to education. I'm sure, Kay, you're going to ask me about some of the announcements that I'm making today as Culture Secretary. You're not in the education space, because that's not my job. I'm not Education Secretary.
You said you cared passionately about it.
I do, but I'm the
Great.
Culture Secretary, so in my job, I'm trying to do what I can do in my department to look after young people. And today and throughout this week, we're going to have a series of announcements on how we can support young people.
What do you make of what she was saying, Mara?
I think what was really interesting was the fact that she wanted to say, on one hand, I'm not the Education Secretary, so don't ask me about education, but one sec, I've got an announcement about education and I want to talk about it. And I felt that slightly disingenuous, because she really just wanted to talk about a very specific policy that she was interested in. And actually, Nick's done some incredible work on the absences in schools, and she is a representative of the government and she is here to answer to it. And she just wasn't wanting to be drawn into it. And I think that really does, as you were saying, show a kind of a potential lack of, you could say, some critics would say, a lack of commitment or a lack of interest in the fact that these absences are so huge. And we know that the Education Select Committee have been quite scathing about this problem, and the government really trying to kind of show that they are taking action on getting disadvantaged kids to be able to learn outside of school. But I think, you know, when you said to her, that's all great, that's all well and good, but what about getting kids in school in the first place? Get the basics right. And she really had nothing to say on that.
What are the figures looking like?
The figures are absolutely awful. There are now twice as many children absent from school as there were pre-pandemic. So we know that as COVID is casting a long shadow. So 125,000 children last year spent more time out of school than in. 125,000, so picture that. 2 football stadiums, if you like. 1.7 million children persistently absent. That's spending 10% or more away from school. And we know that every day away from school reduces the life chances of children. And we are talking about children in the most underprivileged households here. And, you know, we've been talking a lot about why that's the case. You know, I've spoken to hundreds of kids over the last few months. Mental health is definitely an issue. The pandemic has been very damaging to a lot of children. I think parental attitudes towards school have changed. I've spoken to an awful lot of parents who don't think it's their responsibility to get their children into school. So I think a lot has changed since the pandemic.
Mari, just a quick thought before I let you go and talk about it in the next hour as well. What did you make of what she was saying about HS2 and the mayor's meeting in Leeds later on?
It was interesting, wasn't it? We keep hearing the same line from the government on HS2. Things are under review, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are looking into things. But she wasn't really being drawn on actually, are you going to support or compensate the North? Are you going to essentially reassure them that they are not being treated as second-class citizens? And I think a lack of reassurance for the North is a big problem for the government, potentially.
OK. For now, guys, thanks very much indeed. Just to flag ahead that Robin Walker, you'll know who it is, of course, both of you, in fact, Chair of the Education Select Committee, will be talking to us in the next hour about what the government had to say this morning. Thanks for now. See you very shortly. Quick look at the weather.
warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Agnes will move in today with strong winds and heavy rain, bringing the risk of disruption. Already quite windy in the west, with rain moving across Ireland and Wales, but most other places fine with early fog lifting. The rest of the morning will see rain extending across Northern Ireland and other western fringes of Britain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
One of the world's oldest whiskies will be auctioned off after being discovered hidden in a Scottish castle. Wow. The whisky was found behind a cellar door at the 750-year-old Blair Castle in Perthshire, the ancestral home of the Dukes of Atholl. Experts, I bet I've pronounced that wrong and I bet you're going to correct me. Experts believe the Scotch was distilled nearly 200 years ago and may have been sipped by a young Queen Victoria who visited the castle. There we are. If you like a dram, it might be for you. See you in just a sec. Do hope so. Good morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock and you are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News, wherever you're watching us right around the world. On today's programme, we'll talk to the Labour mayors staging an intervention over HS2 today, including Sadiq Khan and Nanny Burnham. Join us from 9:30 for that, and wild weather heading into the UK. We'll tell you where coming up. It's Wednesday, the 27th of September. School absences. Sky News investigates as MPs are warned that mental health support for children is grossly inadequate. More than 100 wedding guests killed in a fire during the bride and groom's first dance. Were fireworks to blame? Plea to the Prime Minister. 5 Labour mayors clubbed together to demand the northern leg of HS2 goes ahead. Why thousands of women in the UK are dying unnecessarily from preventable cancers every year. And a court rules that Donald Trump committed fraud for years while building his real estate empire.
To get what you want, but if you try sometime, it just might find, get what you need.
Sir Mick Jagger reveals who might benefit from the Stones' back catalogue. The number of children absent from school has more than doubled since the pandemic. MPs say the government isn't acting fast enough to stop the harm that this is causing. Nick has been following this story for us for some significant time. Hi, Nick. Tell us about numbers and how this is impacting kids.
Well, as you say, the numbers have doubled since the pandemic, so we know that COVID has cast a very long shadow over a lot of our children. 125,000 children last year, Kay, spent more time out of classroom than in. And about 1.7 million children are persistently absent. That's losing more than 10% of schools. So these numbers are huge. And the government, over the course that I've been looking at this story since the beginning of the year, have told us we get it, we understand it, we're tackling it. Well, this report tells a very different story. This report said that there is a lack of any meaningful result in bringing these numbers down. And the key subject, the key issue keeps coming back time and time again, and that is the mental health of a lot of our school children.
I felt like I was just one of the non-smart kids with school, and I thought I was just useless.
For these school children, speaking openly can feel like a mountain to climb.
Don't really do anything social.
No.
So I normally just stay in my room most of the time.
Yeah.
We've been allowed into these special sessions designed to get to the heart of how children feel about their mental health and how it impacts their education.
Other people target little things about you that they think will get you down, and they do it on purpose. And that really stops me from getting into school sometimes. Yeah. Because I've been a target of that a lot.
This pilot, run in conjunction with Westmoreland and Furness Council, Furness Academy and the charity Family Action, has improved attendance for all of these children, but sessions like these are rare.
Seeing this kind of session up close really hits home the amount of work that has to be done to tackle what is a national crisis in low attendance. This is intensive, it's bespoke, but there are now calls for the government to support more projects like this one, to roll out on a national scale.
A report by an influential committee of cross-party MPs is very critical of the government's efforts to drive down absence rates, which are double pre-pandemic levels. Mental health support for pupils is, they say, grossly inadequate. And crucially, there has been no significant improvement in the speed and scale of reducing absence rates. Lindsay Stanway has taught here at Furness Academy for 28 years.
How worried are you about the lost learning that's going on?
Really worried. So the kids that struggled through COVID, you're trying to pick up improve their resilience, you're trying to improve their social skills, you're trying to do catch up on maths and English that they've missed. And if we don't do something quickly, it's going to become the new norm, and that's not going to be good for anybody.
The committee says the government needs to act with more urgency to prevent long-term harm to children. But it's clear that COVID still casts a long shadow over the education of millions of children.
What did you make of what the government minister said in the last hour?
I thought it actually lacked a little bit of depth, really. And that is kind of true of not only the government, but I think also other political parties. There is a bit of a head-scratching moment, I think, for politicians in how to tackle this. We heard earlier you were speaking to the Culture Secretary, Lucy Frazer. You asked her some pretty straight questions about what's the plan to get these numbers down. This is what she had to say.
I care passionately about children being in school. You know, we put record funding into education, you know, an extra over £2 billion for the next 2 years, you know, £1.5 billion COVID catch-up fund.
Minister, it's about getting these kids back to school and you're not doing enough, is what the report is saying.
Well, there's
COVID was then.
So I know that, you know, this was an issue that was discussed in government at the time, and what we were balancing was people's, you know, the risk to life against other matters.
No.
Well, all these things will be obviously considered in the COVID inquiry, but absolutely the government is committed to education. I'm sure, Kay, you're going to ask me about some of the announcements that I'm making today as Culture Secretary. You're not in the education space, because that's not my job. I'm not Education Secretary.
You said you cared passionately about it.
I do, but I'm the Culture Secretary, so in my job, I'm trying to do what I can do in my department to look after young people. And today and throughout this week, we're going to have a series of announcements on how we can support young people.
And, you know, Kay, speaking to teaching leaders, there is a very real worry that as we head into a general election cycle, the big fanfare of that, we tend to hear much bigger debates, much broader stories, things like health, cost of living, law and order. The worry is that this subject will start to be drowned out, and teachers say that that could be a disaster for thousands of children.
We'll see what Labour's going to do about it very shortly indeed. For now, Nick, thank you. Meantime, our other main story this morning, tragic story. More than 100 people have died at a wedding in Iraq after a fire started during the bride and groom's first dance. It's been reported fireworks were lit during the celebrations. 150 others were injured at the event, which had around 900 guests. The wedding was in a predominantly Christian area, around 200 miles northwest of the capital, Baghdad. Let's get more with Alistair.
There were hundreds of people inside the wedding hall when burning pieces of the ceiling started falling down on them. The fire took hold very quickly, trapping many inside. There has been no official word yet on the cause, but Iraqi state media have reported that fireworks lit during the celebrations could have been responsible. The injured were rushed to hospitals around the region. More than 150 needed treatment. As firefighters combed through what was left of the burnt-out building, looking for survivors, but more likely, more bodies. This was filmed shortly before the fire started, a video of the bride and groom enjoying their first moments of marriage. They have been named as Haneen and Ravan.
They were about to do a slow dance, and then they lit up this thing for the dance, which then caught fire.
There were over 800 or 900 people inside the hall, and the entire place was on fire in seconds, says this man.
I came here to the hospital and I was told that 22 members of my family are burned. So I came here and searched for them. Once I found them, they were transferred to Mosul because their condition was critical.
Iraq's Prime Minister has ordered an investigation into the fire and asked his government to provide all the help that's needed. The country's health ministry described what happened as an unfortunate accident and has warned that the number of dead could rise further.
Alistair with us now. What news of the newly married couple, Alistair?
Well, there was mixed reports about whether or not they survived or not. Initially, the reports were that they hadn't, but subsequently, a good family friend of theirs has told local media in northern Iraq that he's spoken to them and they managed to escape through one of the 3 doors that led out of the wedding venue, a door that led through the kitchen. So that would be good news in amongst what is obviously a tragic situation in northern Iraq. As for the cause of it, it does seem to be blamed on fireworks that were set off as part of the wedding celebrations, but also there's been a suggestion, and it's only a suggestion at this stage, by some authorities in Iraq that the building might have been of very low quality. Now that could be, I stress could, be because in this part of northern Iraq, Islamic State rampaged and pillaged and destroyed a lot of Christian churches. And so the wedding halls that were built after that period were often built quite quickly, and it might have been that they had low quality materials that led to the fire spreading incredibly fast.
OK, for now, thank you. Let's tell you about what's happening at home, should we? 5 Labour mayors will appeal directly to the PM over HS2 today. Fraser standing by for us in Leeds. So who's going to be there and what are they saying, Fraser? Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, well, they'll be saying to the Prime Minister, do not postpone or axe altogether plans for the northern leg of HS2. The original plans to take a route through from Birmingham to Manchester, and for the past few days there have been rumours that the government are planning to delay or even axe that part of HS2 altogether. It's all over money, of course. The original estimate for HS2 back in 2010 was £30 billion. That's now escalated to over £100 billion, and that's despite the fact that certain parts of it have already been paused or cancelled altogether. It's ironic that this meeting of the 5 Labour mayors should be happening in Leeds today. Leeds was part of the original HS2 plan, but the link from Birmingham to Leeds that was proposed has been axed and has been replaced with a hub line, which will a spur line, which will finish in the East Midlands. So Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, has already said that to axe the plans would be treating the North like second-class citizens. Rishi Sunak has done little to allay fears that the project is going to be delayed or cancelled. A Home Office Minister spoke to Sky News yesterday and said that there has no decision has yet been made on the situation, but the mayors are saying that it would be catastrophic, a decision of epic proportions if it were to be delayed. They'll be meeting here at 9:30. We'll be talking to them on Sky News Breakfast shortly after that.
We certainly will. For now, thank you. Just hearing that the UK's largest untapped oil and gas field has been given the green light by the government's North Sea Transition Authority, defying climate warnings about the damage from new fossil fuel projects. What does that all mean? Ian standing by for us in the city. Hi, Ian. You know more about this than me. Tell me more.
Hello, Kay. Yes, this is Rosebank, which is some 80 miles to the west of the Shetland Islands. As you say, it's Britain's biggest untapped source of oil and gas on the North Sea continental shelf. There's been prevarication over this site for more than a decade. I mean, it was discovered more than a decade ago. The US energy giant Chevron was involved in it at one point in the dim and distant past. The owners now are Ithaca Energy, which is a London-listed oil and gas company, and Equinor, which is the state-owned Norwegian energy giant, previously known as Statoil. Now, there are between 300 and 500 million barrels of oil reckoned to be available to be tapped from this field. But obviously, there's a good deal of controversy about it. Opponents have said it could produce something like 200 million tonnes of carbon dioxide were production to go ahead. Now, I think what swayed the government, obviously everything has changed since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. It's really emphasised the need for countries to be more self-sufficient and self-reliant in their own energy sources. Obviously, the UK has got a renewables industry which is pretty nascent, but we still depend very, very heavily on oil and gas in particular. And so obviously the government's thinking is that if you can tap these sources of your own, then that makes you less dependent on the vagaries of the world elsewhere. It's reckoned at its peak if production gets underway between 2026 and 2030, it could be accounting for around 8% of the UK's entire oil and gas production, should production go ahead. Ithaca Energy shares, by the way, I should tell you, Kay, have opened up nearly 8% higher as the market opened this morning.
OK, thanks, Ian. I wonder what Labour thinks about it. Morning.
Good morning. Well, we don't support Rosebank. We think the priority for the country should be transitioning away from fossil fuels, partly because of the volatility of the price of fossil fuels. And we've seen since Russia's invasion of Ukraine just what that has meant, not just for heating prices, but for electricity, because our electricity system is pinned, is matched to that gas price. So real energy security will only come from moving to nuclear, to renewables, to technologies that will insulate us from those pressures. But we have said we understand this is a difficult position for investors. We will not revoke any licences that the government choose to grant, but we don't think this is good value for money.
OK. What do you think about 125,000 ghost kids who spend more time out of school than in school? What are you going to do about that?
No, I think the figures are shocking. I think this is an incredibly significant issue. And to be frank, I worry a great deal even about my own children, who I do make sure are in school, but the impact of the pandemic on them and what it has meant for learning. And you can see in them, you can see in their development what that has meant. But, part of the decisions we've already put forward around things like, removing the VAT exemption for private schools and putting that money, that resource into more teachers for state schools and greater mental health support, mental health counselling for young people. I think that is the kind of priority the country needs to make sure we're doing everything we can for this generation of young people who really bore the brunt of this.
What's the plan?
Well, I think if you, listening to your report you've just made, I mean, the Education Select Committee is identifying quite rightly things like the burden, the impact on young people of what has happened to them because of the pandemic, the need for better mental health support. I think that has got to be a major part of it. I think the resourcing of the state education system overall is clearly an issue as well. But we've got to be frank and say this is I hope, a once in every 100 years event that has maybe led to the particular circumstances, the numbers that we have got. And I never really quite understood why this government, given the money that had to be spent quite rightly on things like furlough, the money that was put forward by their own expert report for the catch-up support that was needed, that we backed in the Labour Party, the resources for that were a fraction, frankly, of what we'd already had to spend in the pandemic. But I think, to be frank, that moment has gone.
You mentioned the fact that you were going to put VAT on private schools straight away, actually, is what I believe, if you win the next election. The Independent Schools Council found that in a survey they carried out that 20% of parents would withdraw their children from private school if VAT was added. That would be a problem straight away. How would you accommodate those kids?
Well, quite simply, those figures aren't correct. So the best report to look at for this policy is the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who said this would raise £1.6 billion, and the transition from people in the private sector to the state sector would be somewhere between 3 and 7%. So that would take £100 to £300 million off the revenue raised, but it would still be a very clear revenue raiser. And of course, they identify themselves that private school fees have risen substantially above inflation for the last few decades. I mean, a 20% real terms rise since 2010. That hasn't produced any real impact on the figures, the enrolment figures for private schools. So I'd say that's a much more independent, authoritative report to go on. But again, on the priority, the figures you've just given for the need for resources in the state system, where the overwhelming majority of British people are educated, show just the need for this pragmatic policy to put more resources in to tackle these problems.
HS2, 5 Labour mayors meeting in Leeds today to try to convince the Prime Minister to continue on with HS2 up to the north. First of all, why Leeds, given that it's not going to Leeds now? And secondly, what makes you think that he'll take any notice?
Well, we want to see HS2 built, certainly from London to Manchester. I declare my interest as someone who lives and represents in part of Greater Manchester, but this is a network. The whole point of HS2 is not about the speed of the journey. It's to take fast services off the existing network, have better local services, and you need a network to do that. So even though you're right to say that original Y leg that would have gone to Leeds went some time ago, the overall impact, particularly on what we call Northern Powerhouse Rail, so this is the aspiration for a further high-speed rail line that would run from Liverpool all the way to Hull, that requires some of the infrastructure for HS2 to be in place. So whilst you say why Leeds, I understand that. It's still relevant to Leeds. It's still about high-speed rail getting to Leeds, but this is about the whole of the Northern network. And look, I don't know why the government has launched the kind of speculation it has. Clearly, even as someone who strongly supports this, we're going to have to see what is it they're hiding, what is it they're not telling us about the cost of this. But this is, I cannot believe as a country we cannot build a rail line between London and Manchester. I just cannot believe we don't have the capacity to do that.
Surely, is it the best use of resource?
I think the need to have a transport infrastructure project that begins before the need for it gets absolutely acute, because it takes time to build, and usually when it comes to infrastructure in this country we wait the last possible minute and don't have it when we need it, and the need to tackle what is one of the most unequal distributions across the different parts of England, certainly.
So you would reinstate it?
Well, I want it built. I obviously want to know what is the government hiding if they've blown a hole in the budget. Well, I've got to see if they've blown a hole in the budget, but I want to see it built to Manchester.
Would you reinstate it?
I've got to see those figures first, Kay. I mean, if they've literally blown the entire budget, I've got to see what that means. But again, I go back to that. Are we really saying as a country we don't have the wherewithal to build a railway? I just can't believe that's what we're saying.
OK, it's good to see, as always. Thanks very much, Jonathan. Thank you. Quick look at our other headlines on the programme for you this very morning. A court has found that Donald Trump committed fraud for years while building his real estate empire. The civil lawsuit brought by New York's Attorney General found that the former president and his company deceived banks and insurers by massively overvaluing assets and exaggerating his net worth on paperwork. GB News presenter Dan Wootton has apologised over comments made on his show by Lawrence Fox about a female journalist. Fox made a string of remarks about Ava Evans, the political correspondent for online news site Joe, including describing her as a little woman. The channel has also apologised and launched an investigation into the incident. She has replied on Twitter. British Airways has said safety is always their top priority following reports that a pilot took cocaine before trying to fly a plane from South Africa to London. The airline says the matter was referred to the Civil Aviation Authority and the individual no longer works for the company. There's a warning that data breaches are putting survivors of domestic abuse at risk. The Information Commissioner's Office has reprimanded 7 organisations, including a law firm and an NHS trust, also a government department, in the last 14 months for allowing information about breaches that could have put victims at further risk of harm. David Walliams, seen here after just swimming, the Walliams and swimming the length of the Thames, is suing a production company behind Britain's Got Talent, the ITV show he appeared on as a judge for a decade. The case is listed as dealing with data protection. No further details are available. It follows his departure from the programme after a leaked transcript showed the star making offensive off-air comments about contestants. Turning now to one of our main stories, the number of children absent from school has more than doubled since the pandemic, with MPs saying that the government isn't acting fast enough to stop the issue. Let's get more now from the chair of the Education Select Committee, that's Robin Walker. Hello, Mr Walker, thanks for joining us on the programme. What more should the government, or could the government be doing?
Well, firstly, there is legislation ready to go, which is about a statutory register for children not in schools. We think that should be brought forward as soon as possible, preferably in the King's Speech, to ensure that that can be on the statute book in time for the next year, academic year. Secondly, more investment in mental health, both inside and outside schools. It's not just about what we can do with counsellors in schools, it's also about how we make sure we've got a properly resourced CAM service to support children at home and make sure that they're supported in the right way there. Thirdly, delivering on the government's promise of the right place, right support at the right time for SEND children. It's very clear a big part of the challenge is around where children have special educational needs and they aren't being met. But this is an issue which has got worse since the pandemic. The level of persistent and severe absence has increased, and that is children missing out on their education. It's also children being put at risk in some cases through not being visible to the system. So it is an acute problem. The Secretary of State has rightly described it as a crisis, and what we're calling for in this report is a crisis response.
A report by the Education Online from yesterday suggesting that it's not just children that are skipping class, a report showing that some parents don't think children need to be in school full time.
Yes, and there was some worrying research by Public First on this as well, which suggested that attitudes have changed since the pandemic. And in some respects, that's not a surprise in that parents were told for long periods of time to keep their children away from school. And so it's understandable that they react to that and they think, well, this is somehow different. What we're saying, though, it's very clearly it's beneficial for children to be in school for educational reasons, for their mental health, for their social development, and in terms of safeguarding. And so for all those reasons, we believe that actually those norms where parents do think it's important for their children to be in school need to be restored.
OK. How high a priority do you think that this will be going into the next general election?
I think it is a priority. I think you'll hear all the parties talking about it. But actually, there are some issues on which there is complete cross-party consensus, like getting this statutory register into place. And that's why I don't think we should be leaving it till the next general election. We should be using the time available that we have in Parliament to put this legislation through Parliament. That it's been drafted, it's ready to go, and there really is no reason now for the government not to be bringing that forward.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
The weather, technical term for the weather over the next couple of days, it's going to be pants.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Why? Well, Storm Agnes is moving in today. Strong winds, heavy rain, bringing the risk of disruption. Already quite windy in the west, with rain moving across Ireland and Wales. But most places are fine with early fog lifting. The rest of the morning will see rain extending across Northern Ireland and other western fringes of Britain. Expect some heavy downpours.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, Mick Jagger has revealed who might benefit from the Rolling Stones back catalogue.
Try sometime, it just might find you what you need.
So who needs it most? The singer suggested the post-1971 tracks, one of the most prestigious music collections in the world, may be given to charity rather than being sold for a large sum of money. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Mick Jagger said his kids don't need $500 million to live well, and suggested giving it to charity would do some good in the world. So there, the hunt for missing artefacts from the British Museum. Let's talk about them. Appeals for helping to find some of the more than 2,000 treasures thought to have been stolen. Also, we'll hear from a group supporting LGBTQ plus refugees after the Home Secretary said being gay isn't enough to qualify as an asylum seeker.
Derna itself has initially had about 30,000 displaced people. So what we mean is people who have actually literally lost their homes and are now staying in temporary shelters. That's gone down to about 20,000, but they've moved out to other areas because Derna is pretty inhospitable at the moment. The infrastructure is very bad there. We were actually told by the Minister of Health when I was there in Derna that they need psychosocial support. The trauma that has been faced, not just by the affected populations, but by the hospital staff. So key doctors and nurses lost their lives. Thankfully, Libyan expertise, medical expertise has come in from all over the country, but they're lacking in basic supplies, including fresh water as well. Severe storm, and that affected the northeastern coast of Libya. I was actually flying in on that day and the airports were closed. It affected the east the most. Benghazi is the second biggest city in Libya. However, in Derna, there were 2 dams that collapsed, and that led to the catastrophic loss of life and displacement of people. You have an internationally recognised government in the west, in Tripoli, the Government of National Unity, and you have another opposing government in the east, Government of National Stability. This moment of tragedy seems to have brought both governments together. So the Government of National Unity has actually established a National Emergency Committee, and the government in the east has put aside funding to really work on providing the resources that are needed. So I think there's a rare moment of coalescence here where the tragedy has brought people together, the people of Libya together.
5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Good morning again, everybody. You are watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Wednesday morning, and this is what our top stories are looking like. MPs have warned mental health support for children struggling to attend school is grossly inadequate as the number of absences since the pandemic doubles. The UK's largest untapped oil and gas field has been given the green light by the government's North Sea Transition Authority, defying climate warnings. Labour's Shadow Business Secretary told this programme the party would not revoke the licence. More than 100 people have been killed in a fire at a wedding in northern Iraq, which started during the couple's first dance. The newlyweds are thought to be safe. A new report on healthcare gender inequality has found tens of thousands of women are dying from preventable cancers in the UK. Shaman has more for us. So tell us, what's going on?
Well, this is one of the largest studies of its kind. It looked at women and cancer. It looked at hundreds of thousands of women living with cancer globally in 185 countries around the world. Now, they found that there were some 2.3 million women dying prematurely each day in the 185 countries that it studies. One of the things that I sort of was interested in when looking at this research is the fact that they speak about women's cancer, the idea of women's cancer being focused on. So that's things like cervical cancer and breast cancer. But this is despite the fact that actually it's lung cancer and colon cancer that are among the top 3 killers of women because of the disease. Now, those are some of the global figures that I've referenced, but we did have figures from the UK too. The research found that 24,000 women in the UK aged between 30 and 69 die from cancer, which can be avoided. 6 in 10 of these cancer deaths could be averted through prevention and earlier diagnosis, and the other 4 in 10 deaths could be avoided through improving access to timely and quality treatment. So this idea that they're calling for more of a feminist approach is to make sure that sex and gender is included in all cancer-related research and to really prioritise women in leadership roles too when it comes to policy work in future.
OK, for now, Shaman, thank you. Let's talk about an artist now called Graham Hurd-Wood. He set himself a challenge 10 years ago to paint every resident of the city that he lives in. Lucky for him, the city is St David's, the smallest city in the UK. He's with us now. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, how are you?
I am very well. Tell us why you decided to do this.
Well, it started off as a project to do a piece of work, which would be a composite of, say, 80 portraits and have it as one piece. So from a distance, it would look quite abstract. And then as you got closer, you'll see the sort of personalities of each portrait. And that's a portrait I just did of a friend's dog who passed away last year. So I trained at the Royal Academy and learned, we did a lot of drawing from life, and there was a lot of portraiture as well. So I was inspired by that. My father was an artist, and he did some wonderful portraits. So I suppose it's in my psyche, really. So I decided, unfortunately, 10 years ago, my fiancée passed away, Debbie, and she said, if you can do 80, you can do 100. If you can do 100, you can do 200. And she said, you know, you could actually do the city of St David's. And I just thought, what an amazing idea. And it's sort of her legacy as well. And it's very much, you know, the way I've dealt with bereavement and focusing on people. And I've met some amazing people through it and some wonderful characters. And you get to know a certain sort of facet of their characters, an insight into who they are. And it's done me the power of good. And I just absolutely adore doing them.
Tell me about Debbie.
Sorry?
Tell me about Debbie.
Debbie, we were together. She was my tattoo artist, and we got together. And well, I sort of kept going for tattoos because I sort of actually was stung to fall for her. but unfortunately, she had breast cancer, and then she was in remission, and unfortunately, it went to her brain. So, she fought so hard for her life. I'm sorry, I'm feeling it's quite difficult to talk about this. Anyway, and her legacy for me is not just the tattoos; it's the fact I'm doing the portraits. Everyone I do, it's a memory of her as well.
How are you going to show that? How are they all going to be shown when you finally complete this work?
Well, I'm trying to find a venue. I have had some dialogue with the Museum of Wales in Cardiff, but I'd like to start off here. And I've been talking to the Dean and the Bishop, and they seem keen on me doing something with the cathedral being the core of the community. And it seems very appropriate to be able to, use that beautiful place as an exhibition space, or possibly do some projections onto the cathedral.
And how soon before you think you might have completed this body of work?
Well, my philosophy is just to carry on doing it. I love doing them so much, and it sort of centers me. And it's something, as I said earlier on, a focal point for me. And it sort of, so by next year, I hope to achieve 1,000. Well, I don't hope, I will achieve 1,000. So that seems a considerable number to exhibit. And I've had an immense...
Sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt you there, Graham. My director, Darren, makes a very good point. If there's a baby born, do you have to go and then do their painting as well?
I have to wait 20 years. No, I'm doing adults. So I have done some kids. I've done the painted the under-11 rugby team to raise some money for their, so they can carry on. And that was a lovely little project to do. I tend to sort of try and concentrate on adults there.
Okay, very good point. Hopefully those pings are people watching you on the telly and saying, I've just seen you on the telly on Sky News on The Breakfast Show. Let's hope so. Let us know when you go to the Museum of Wales, and we'd love to be involved in sharing that with people around the world as well. So, but for now, thank you.
You've been very kind. I've had an amazing response, so thank you.
We're thrilled. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, from the Museum of Wales to the British Museum, they've released images of missing items in an attempt to recover them. The museum is asking the public to help identify and recover the treasures believed to have been stolen from their collection. An estimated 2,000 artefacts had been taken over a significant period of time, with the majority being from its gems and jewellery collection, including gold rings and bracelets from Greece and from Rome. Quite a storm about that at the time, wasn't there? Storm brewing here as well in the form of Agnes. Tell us more.
That's right. Agnes is on the way. At the moment, it's pretty calm out there at the moment. So people might be waking up going, where is this storm? But it is on the way. It's been deepening a lot in the Atlantic and it's on its way. The impacts will be seen across parts of Ireland first before later today across northern and western parts of the UK. There are warnings in place. The Met Office have a yellow warning that covers the bulk of the UK through today, where we could see gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour, locally more in exposed coastal areas, particularly around the Irish Sea. We could see up to 80 miles per hour. And there are some rain warnings as well across southern parts of Scotland. But Ireland also has some warnings, and they've got status orange alerts across southern counties there, so they will see the impacts first.
Well, hold that thought for a second, because Jerry Murphy, in fact, meteorologist and senior weather forecaster at Met Erin, is joining us now. Hi, Jerry. How's it looking at the moment?
Good morning, Kay. Well, in Ireland, things are really picking up here at the moment from the perspective of Storm Agnes. We have the rainfall pushing up across the country. It's going to reach the northeast of Ireland fairly shortly in the next hour or two, and the winds are picking up as well. And as you mentioned there, we have orange level warnings in place for today. Now, the peak of the storm in Ireland will be through the daylight hours between 9 a.m. and about 5 a.m. And certainly southern and southeastern counties will bear the brunt of it. So our orange level warnings are for the southern region, Munster counties, Kerry, Cork, Waterford, for rainfall, and then Kerry, Cork, Waterford, Wexford, Carlow, Kilkenny, Wicklow and Tipperary for winds. So we do expect very strong winds as we go through today with possible damaging gusts. Our orange level wind warnings mean that winds will gust above 110 kilometres per hour. That's above about 60, 70 miles per hour. And so a very wet and windy day over Ireland, with certainly the south of the country getting the most severe conditions.
OK, keep an eye on that for us, and we'll check in with you tomorrow, Jerry, see how it's going. For now, thanks very much indeed. Tipperary as well, that's a long way. Talk to us about suggestions that we're going to have fantastic weather coming up.
Well, I'm not sure about fantastic weather, but certainly there's been lots of talk about possible heat wave going into October. That's very unlikely.
That would be an Indian summer then, wouldn't it?
Probably not just yet, because we haven't actually had the first frost of the season. We would expect to have that first. So an Indian summer we would expect later on, perhaps later into October and into November. We need to have that frost. We've had fairly mild conditions. Yesterday we got to 24.4 degrees Celsius, so temperatures well above average, and we are likely to see temperatures above average as we go into October as well. But heat wave, that's probably pushing it a little bit.
OK, Jo and I, thanks very much indeed. So with that storm Agnes coming, you probably need a wee dram. How do you fancy this one? One of the world's oldest whiskies. Full details of how you can get hold of it in just a second.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
esteemed panel for you, forgive me, and we're going to be talking about why the Home Secretary thinks that being gay isn't enough to seek refuge here in the UK. Joining us, Lord Alf Dubs, and also Layla Zada, Executive Director of Rainbow Migration, former refugee. This is what the Home Secretary said yesterday.
We will not be able to sustain an asylum system if, in effect, simply being gay or a woman or fearful of discrimination in your country of origin is sufficient to qualify for protection.
Layla, thoughts?
Well, we all want to live somewhere where we can be safe and be near our loved ones and have hope for the future. And the sad fact is that in around 70 countries worldwide, LGBT people are criminalised. And to get asylum here, they have to show that they are being persecuted. And that means people who are fleeing torture, for example, or the death penalty. One of the people we worked with last year who has been granted asylum in this country, and rightly so, is Adams. He fled Ghana because he'd been attacked on the streets for being bisexual, and his partner was killed. Similarly, Mickey from Azerbaijan, he fled because his brother threatened to kill him for being gay. Now, this is a well-founded fear of persecution upheld by the Refugee Convention, and these people have been welcomed into this country, as me and my family were when we left as refugees when I was a child.
Lord Dubs, it's not policy, though. She's provoking the debate, and a debate needs to be had, is what she's saying.
Yeah, but she goes abroad to another country, she doesn't have the debate in this country, and she tries to tear up international agreements and conventions. I mean, this is not the way to behave. I think she's covering up for the complete incompetence of the Home Office in the way they're handling refugees. And I don't think ministers shouldn't go abroad and then attack this country. They shouldn't do that.
Do you acknowledge, Layla, that, 1951 was a very long time ago, more than 70 years ago, and we do need to look again at the convention?
The convention has saved lives. It saved the lives of my parents, and that means me and my sisters grew up with our family. It is saving lives of people today. It would be an extremely damaging thing to do, to tamper with that convention. It would mean that people could be sent back to places where they could be tortured and where they could be killed. And in this country, we've opened up our hearts and even our homes to people fleeing persecution. Thousands of us have hosted people fleeing Ukraine. So we really are a warm and welcoming country. And it's quite sad to see the Home Secretary speaking in a way that's not reflective of the compassion that most people in this country have.
Do you acknowledge, my Lord, that we do need to draw up new guidelines?
I don't think we do. I think
so. We just let anybody in?
No, we don't let anybody in. The test for under the Geneva Convention is a quite tough one. It is somebody who has a well-founded fear of persecution on grounds of race, religion and political belief.
But they need to seek refuge in the first safe country.
Well, that's something that the Home Secretary has invented. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees don't say that. And indeed, it wouldn't work. Look, when Germany took 1 million Syrians, the Germans asked for help from other countries and they didn't get it. If we said the first safe country, the 1 million Syrians would have been in Greece, Italy and Malta. That doesn't work either, neither in principle nor in practice. And I think if the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says this is the way the Convention should apply, we should listen to them instead of saying we know better.
Tell us your story.
Well, my parents were activists. My father in particular, he wanted democracy in Iran. And simply for that reason, for peacefully trying to bring about democracy, his life was in danger. So he had to leave. It was the only way. And we came to the UK because actually my parents had already lived here once before. They came as students, they then went back to Iran, the situation deteriorated and they left. So of course they were going to come back to the country they already knew, where they spoke the language, where they had connections. And my father had a brother here. And this is particularly important given that 2 of his brothers were killed. If we hadn't done that, my father would probably not be around today, and me and my sisters may be orphans, or at best, we would have grown up in prison alongside my mother. Now, most people, when they flee their countries, they actually stay in the country next door. It's actually not many people who make it this far. And those who do actually come here for very valid reasons, like my parents and my family did.
But not everybody. And we have seen an increase in the number of Albanians, young Albanian men who were coming to the UK. To that end, the government has done a deal now with Albania. But not everyone that comes across the Channel is doing it for fear of persecution in their home country?
Well, the evidence is that over 70% of those that have come across the channel in that way are actually given refugee status. So if our system says that they are victims of persecution, then who's the Home Secretary to challenge that? 71% is an awesomely large figure for successful claims.
We are an overcrowded little island, though, my lord, and we are coming up to a general election. Our net migration, I think, was something like 600,000 with the latest figures. How do we continue to cope with that? How does the infrastructure of Great Britain continue to cope?
But 600,000, it may be the total, and this is for a government that says they want to keep the numbers down. But of those, how many are asylum seekers? About 45,000. So they're a small proportion of the total. And indeed,
But they add to the burden, is what the government would say.
Well, the government would say that, but then they should try and solve the problem here by dealing properly with the system. Look, there are 170,000 people who are waiting for a determination of their asylum claim. They're not allowed to work, they hang around here, they're in hotels, they can't make their own way. This is the government's fault. Suella Braverman goes to New York or Washington and tries to blame other people for her own failures and the failures of her government. I think we should acknowledge that. And you had the right point. A general election is coming. Isn't that what it's about? They want to hype up the argument about refugees as part of an election-winning strategy. I think that's very shabby.
How are we seen on the world stage when it comes to offering comfort, solace, support in someone's hour of need, especially if they're gay?
Well, I can tell you that yesterday we had a lot of panic among the people that we support who are absolutely terrified about what the Home Secretary was saying and really fearful about whether this meant they were going to be kicked out of the country and back into the arms of people who had sexually abused them, who had killed their partners or attempted to kill them themselves. This government should really be treating people with compassion. They need to create safe routes for people to come here, and they need to allow people to work as well, rather than allowing people to languish, causing them immense distress in this country. We are dealing with people who no longer have the will to live because of how this government is treating them in this country, and they need to have access to proper health services and no longer to be forced to live in poverty.
And you have concerns about our creaking infrastructure, coping with many more thousands of people coming on a yearly basis?
Well, the numbers of people who are coming to this country are about the same as they were 20 years ago. And any problems we have with the infrastructure is down to this government. They are the ones who are not inviting people for interview quickly enough. We are seeing people who apply for asylum. They want to engage with the system. They want to have their interview, and they have to wait over a year. And then they delay making decisions on people's cases. And in the meantime, they are barred from working. It doesn't make any sense.
OK, we must leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you. I'm sure you've got strong views on that. The Culture Secretary, we asked her about how those comments by the Home Secretary might apply to an asylum seeker from a country like Rwanda who was gay. You are persecuted. It's not illegal, but you are persecuted for being gay in Rwanda. What if you managed to come to the UK? Should you be allowed to stay?
You're taking a particular country,
Yes,
which is Rwanda,
I am.
which, as you know, we believe is a safe country. That is a matter before
Not
the
if you're
courts.
gay.
That is a matter before the courts at the moment, and we believe that we are complying with those UN and international conventions in asking Rwanda to take those people who are coming illegally here.
Mario, you put the same question to Chris Philp yesterday. He used to work in the Home Office, didn't he? What did you make of what the Culture Secretary said today?
It was really interesting. She didn't have a really concrete answer when you asked her about gay people who were going to be fleeing persecution. And she just continued to stress the same point that we heard from Suella Braverman about the difference between persecution and discrimination. But the issue is that I think the government are trying to say people aren't being persecuted, they're just being discriminated against, and therefore it's not a legitimate refugee claim. The issue is, as you put to her, well, there are a lot of places like Rwanda, for instance, where it says on the government website that gay people suffer abuse, including from local authorities. And therefore, if that's not persecution, then we need to really maybe clarify what that means by persecution. How far do you have to be abused for you to be seen as being persecuted? That is a bit of a grey area. Now, speaking to Tory MPs, I'm going to give you just a few really little tiny little quotes from Tory MPs and their reaction to Suella Braverman. One very right-wing Tory MP told me they found it uncomfortably right-wing, which was shocking because they are very right-wing. Another person said that her comments about multiculturalism being a failure, I will have to censor this for the breakfast show, but they said that she can bleep off and do it from the back benches. They were so furious with her comments about being multicultural being a failure. So Tory MP is actually really not that pleased with her comments yesterday so far. A couple feel that it's on point, but most feel she went too far.
OK, let's wait and see what happens when she comes back to the UK. Of course, she made this speech in Washington. Why? Maybe it was because of the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Agnes will move in today with strong winds and heavy rain, bringing the risk of disruption. Already quite windy in the west, with rain moving across Ireland and Wales, but most other places are fine with early fog lifting. The rest of the morning will see rain extending across Northern Ireland and other western fringes of Britain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That bad weather, time for a wee dram. One of the world's oldest whiskies will be auctioned off after being discovered hidden in a Scottish castle. Whisky was found behind a cellar door at the 750-year-old Blair Castle in Perthshire, the ancestral home of the Dukes of Atholl. Experts believe the Scotch was distilled nearly 200 years ago and may have been sipped by young Queen Victoria, who visited the castle. A total of 24 bottles will be auctioned individually before the end of the year. Just 2 fingers of that for me. Thanks very much indeed. Just ahead of the next hour here on Sky. Stay tuned. Morning, everyone. It is 9 o'clock, and you are very welcome to join us for the final hour of the breakfast show here on Sky News Wednesday morning. On today's programme, we'll talk to the Labour mayors staging an intervention over HS2 today, including Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham. Join us from past for that. And wild weather heading into the UK. We'll tell you where coming up very shortly. Wednesday, 27th of September. School absences. Sky News investigates as MPs are warned mental health support for children is grossly inadequate. UK's largest untapped oil and gas field has been given the green light, defying climate warnings.
We will not revoke any licences that the government choose to grant, but we don't think this is good value for money.
More than 100 wedding guests killed in a fire during the bride and groom's first dance. Were fireworks to blame? Plea to the Prime Minister. 5 Labour mayors clubbed together to demand the northern leg of HS2 goes ahead. Why thousands of women in the UK are dying unnecessarily from preventable cancers every year. Sadiq reveals who might benefit from the Stones' back catalogue. All of that to come, but we start with the number of children absent from school, which has more than doubled since the pandemic. MPs say the government isn't acting fast enough to stop the harm this is causing. We've heard from the government this morning. We've also heard from Labour, and also the chairman of the Education Committee was very damning of the government. Nick, good morning.
That's right. This is a very critical report, which I think lays bare what the committee says is a lack of work, a lack of progress in trying to get these huge numbers down. You know, absence rates have gone up so much since the pandemic. We know that that is casting a shadow on the education of thousands of children. And one subject, Kay, keeps popping up time and time again, I have to say, in all the months I've been doing that, and that is the mental health of school children and how it impacts their ability to get to school.
I felt like I was just one of the like non-smart kids of school, and I thought I was just useless.
For these school children, speaking openly can feel like a mountain to climb.
Don't really do anything social.
No.
So I normally just stay in my room most of the time.
Yeah.
We've been allowed into these special sessions designed to get to the heart of how children feel about their mental health and how it impacts their education.
Other people target little things about you that they think will get you down, and they do it on purpose. And that really stops me from getting into school sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I've been targeted that a lot.
This pilot, run in conjunction with Westmoreland and Furness Council, Furness Academy and the charity Family Action, has improved attendance for all of these children, but sessions like these are rare.
Seeing this kind of session up close really hits home the amount of work that has to be done to tackle what is a national crisis in low attendance. This is intensive, it's bespoke, but there are now calls for the government to support more projects like this one, to roll out on a national scale.
A report by an influential committee of cross-party MPs is very critical of the government's efforts to drive down absence rates, which are double pre-pandemic levels. Mental health support for pupils is, they say, grossly inadequate. And crucially, there has been no significant improvement in the speed and scale of reducing absence rates. Lindsay Stanway has taught here at Furness Academy for 28 years.
How worried are you about the lost learning that's going on?
Really worried. So the kids that struggled through COVID, you're trying to pick up the improve their resilience, you're trying to improve their social skills, you're trying to do catch up on maths and English that they've missed. And if we don't do something quickly, it's going to become the new norm, and that's not going to be good for anybody.
The committee says the government needs to act with more urgency to prevent long-term harm to children. But it's clear that COVID still casts a long shadow over the education of millions of children.
So, obviously we'll find more of your report online, etc. And we have been talking to lots of people today, including the government, including Labour, including, as I was saying, the chair of the Education Select Committee. What did you make of what we were hearing from them?
I think my takeaway from today, and a lot of the work that we've been doing on Sky News has kind of been confirmed in this report today, is the sort of lack of depth in policy from all political parties on how on earth they think they're going to drive these numbers down. We've got to get children back into school. And what I've seen in places like Barrow and Furness is schools relying more and more on charities to pick up the slack because they don't have the money to spend on this kind of thing. And schools are struggling to be able to cope with trying to get their children back into school for a whole host of reasons, cost of living, changing parental attitudes. And today we've heard from Robin Walker, the chair of the Education Select Committee, who's been quite critical of the government. And of course, you spoke to the Culture Secretary, Lucy Frazer. Here's what both of them had to say.
This is an issue which has got worse since the pandemic. The level of persistent and severe absence has increased. And that is children missing out on their education. It's also children being put at risk in some cases through not being visible to the system. So it is an acute problem. The Secretary of State has rightly described it as a crisis. And what we're calling for in this report is a crisis response.
I care passionately about children being in school. You know, we put record funding into education, you know, an extra over £2 billion for the next 2 years, you know, £1.5 billion COVID catch-up fund.
Minister, it's about getting these kids back to school and you're not doing enough, is what the report is saying.
Well, there's
OK,
a one
COVID was then.
So I know that, you know, this was an issue that was discussed in government at the time, and what we were balancing was people's, you know, the risk to life against other matters.
No.
Well, all these things will be obviously considered in the COVID inquiry, but absolutely the government is committed to education. I'm sure, Kay, you're going to ask me about some of the announcements that I'm making today as Culture Secretary. You're not in the education space, because that's not my job. I'm not Education Secretary.
You said you cared passionately about it.
I do, but I'm the Culture Secretary. So in my job, I'm trying to do what I can do in my department to look after young people. And today and throughout this week, we're going to have a series of announcements on how we can support young people.
I suppose one of the big questions, Nick, finally on this point is how much is it going to play as part of a major strand in the next general election?
Well, all the politicians we've spoken to today believe that this is going to be quite a big election issue. I'm not convinced, and teachers aren't convinced about that. You know what it's like in the fanfare of an election. We tend to play a lot on drama. We hear a lot about debates. And these issues, however important they are, they tend to start to take a sort of side seat. And that's the real worry. Teachers are worried about thousands of children not getting into school. And it's a concern for all of us to try and get them in there and continue their learning.
I remember Tony Blair saying education, education, education. Let's see what the slogan is come the next election. For now, Nick, thanks very much indeed. Don't forget, you can see more of Nick's report online, skynews.com. Meantime, the UK's largest untapped oil and gas field has been given the green light by the government's North Sea Transition Authority, defying climate warnings about the damage from new fossil fuel packages. Speaking to me earlier, the Shadow Business Secretary, that's Jonathan Reynolds, of course, said Labour wouldn't revoke the licence if they were elected to government, despite opposing the project.
We don't support Rosebank. We think the priority for the country should be transitioning away from fossil fuels, partly because of the volatility of the price of fossil fuels. And we've seen since Russia's invasion of Ukraine just what that has meant, not just for heating prices, but for electricity. So our electricity system is pinned, is matched to that gas price. So real energy security will only come from moving to nuclear, to renewables, to technologies that will insulate us from those pressures. But we have said we understand this is a difficult position for investors. We will not revoke any licences that the government choose to grant, but we don't think this is good value for money.
Ian's with us. Hi, Ian. Obviously looking forward to your show a little bit later on, but what are you making of what we're hearing this morning?
I thought that was quite an astute comment from Jonathan Ashworth. Sort of smacked a little bit of Boris Johnson's cakeism, having your cake and eat it, because he can remain on the side of the climate campaigners who wanted this project halted by saying we were opposed to it, but they're not going to revoke the licence. And that's almost a sort of recognition that there is some merit in what the government has announced today. So I thought that was quite astute politics there. And the thinking behind this, Kay, essentially is that the UK needs to obviously move move towards a transition. But in the meantime, oil and gas are going to pick up the slack because we don't have sufficient renewable or nuclear capacity online yet. So gas is going to tide us over until we reach that point of net zero. And in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think the government feels you need to have a greater degree of self-sufficiency in energy, more energy independence, and that's what has underpinned this announcement. This is the biggest undeveloped site, as you say, on the North Sea continental shelf. It has at least 300 million barrels of recoverable oil. At peak production between 2026 and 2030, it could be producing some 69,000 barrels per day, and that it would make up around 8% of UK oil and gas production in that time. It will create around 1,600 jobs, the companies who own the site, that's Equinor and Ithaca Energy, are saying this morning.
OK, for now, Ian, thanks. We see you 11:30 and 4:30, don't we?
That's right.
I'm already looking forward to it. Thanks a lot, Ian. Our other main story this morning, more than 100 people have died at a wedding in Iraq after a fire started during the bride and groom's first dance. It's been reported fireworks were lit during the celebrations. 150 others were injured at the event, which had around 900 guests attending. The wedding was in a predominantly Christian area around 200 miles northwest of the capital. Here's Alistair with more.
There were hundreds of people inside the wedding hall when burning pieces of the ceiling started falling down on them. The fire took hold very quickly, trapping many inside. There has been no official word yet on the cause, but Iraqi state media have reported that fireworks lit during the celebrations could have been responsible. The injured were rushed to hospitals around the region. More than 150 needed treatment. As firefighters combed through what was left of the burnt-out building, looking for survivors, but more likely, more bodies. This was filmed shortly before the fire started, a video of the bride and groom enjoying their first moments of marriage. They have been named as Haneen and Ravan.
They were about to do a slow dance, and then they lit up this thing for the dance, which then caught fire.
There were over 800 or 900 people inside the hall, and the entire place was on fire in seconds, says this man.
I came here to the hospital and I was told that 22 members of my family are burned. So I came here and searched for them. Once I found them, they were transferred to Mosul because their condition was critical.
Iraq's Prime Minister has ordered an investigation into the fire and asked his government to provide all the help that's needed. The country's health ministry described what happened as an unfortunate accident and has warned that the number of dead could rise further. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
I'm looking at some of the other headlines on the programme for you this morning. Now, GB News has apologised and says it's launched an investigation into comments made on the channel by Lawrence Fox about a female journalist. Fox made a string of remarks about Ava Evans, the political correspondent for online news site Joe, including describing her as a little woman. Media regulator Ofcom says it has received a number of complaints about Fox's comments. We've also heard from Ava, who says that the discussion made her feel physically sick. A court has found that Donald Trump committed fraud for years while building his real estate empire. The civil lawsuit brought by New York's Attorney General found that the former president and his company deceived banks and insurers by massively overvaluing assets and exaggerating his net worth on paperwork. Let's tell you about British Airways as well, should we? They've said that safety is always their top priority following reports that a pilot took cocaine before trying to fly an aircraft from Johannesburg to London Heathrow. The airline says the matter was referred to the Civil Aviation Authority and the individual no longer works for them. Warning that data breaches are putting survivors of domestic abuse at risk. The Information Commissioner's Office has reprimanded 7 organisations, including a law firm, an NHS trust and a government department in the last 14 months for allowing information about breaches that could have put victims at further risk of harm. David Walliams seen here after swimming the full length of the Thames. He's suing the production company behind Britain's Got Talent, which is the ITV show he appeared on as a judge for more than a decade. The case is listed as dealing with data protection. No further details have been provided. It follows his departure from the programme after a leaked transcript showed the star making offensive off-air comments about contestants, including a female pensioner. New report about healthcare, gender inequalities. Let's find out more, should we? Tell me more about this.
Well, the findings of this report are pretty stark. It found that around 800,000 women that died of cancer around the world, their deaths could have been prevented. It was a global study. It looked at 185 countries around the world, and it found that 2.3 million women each year die prematurely as a result of cancer in those 185 countries that it studied. What I thought was quite interesting is that it speaks about the fact that women's cancer is often prioritised. So a cervical cancer or breast cancer, for example, that being despite the fact that lung cancer and colon cancer are among the top 3 killers of women around the world. Now, those are some of the global stats. I do have some statistics from here in the UK as well. The research found that 24,000 women in the UK aged between 30 and 69 die from cancer, which can be avoided. It also found that 6 in 10 of these cancer deaths could have been averted through prevention and early diagnosis, and the other 4 in 10 deaths could have been avoided through improving access to timely and quality treatment. So this idea that they're calling for a feminist approach is to really put women at the heart of research and policy work, as it leads to the fact that there are too few women leaders when it comes to cancer research in this country.
Yeah, OK. Shimon Fanai, thanks very much. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you this hour, claim and counterclaim in the Ukraine war surrounding the death of a Russian commander, joined in the studio by Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik after the break. And moving to a lighter note, what happened next when this bear fancied an enchilada? I'll tell you in a second.
Derna itself has initially had about 30,000 displaced people. So what we mean is people who have actually literally lost their homes and are now staying in temporary shelters. That's gone down to about 20,000, but they've moved out to other areas because Derna is pretty inhospitable at the moment. The infrastructure is very bad there. We were actually told by the Minister of Health when I was there in Derna that they need psychosocial support. The trauma that has been faced, not just by the affected populations, but by the hospital staff. So key doctors and nurses lost their lives. Thankfully, Libyan expertise, medical expertise has come in from all over the country, but they're lacking in basic supplies, including fresh water as well. Severe storm, and that affected the north-eastern coast of Libya. I was actually flying in on that day, and the airports were closed. It affected the east the most. Benghazi is the second biggest city in Libya. However, in Derna, there were 2 dams that collapsed, and that led to the catastrophic loss of life and displacement of people. You have an internationally recognised government in the west, in Tripoli, the Government of National Unity, and you have another opposing government in the east, Government of National Stability. This moment of tragedy seems to have brought both governments together. So the Government of National Unity has actually established a National Emergency Committee, and the government in the east has put aside funding to really work on providing the resources that are needed. So I think there's a rare moment of coalescence here where the tragedy has brought people together, the people of Libya together.
Again, everybody, let's talk about Ukraine. Officials say they're clarifying information after a video appeared with Russia's Black Sea Fleet, its commander, alive, they say, in a defence meeting today. Ukraine previously announced it had killed Admiral Viktor Sokolov on Friday. Let's get some clarification, if we can. Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik with us now in the studio. Is he dead or not?
Well, hello, Kay. I don't think I can give you more information than Ukrainian officials, but I can tell you that recently we've been very successful in destroying everyone who is leading the forces to kill us. And he was in Crimea. Crimea is Ukraine. He was not supposed to be there.
So what would have happened then? Do you think it's old footage that the Russians...
It could be old footage. It could be old footage. It could be made-up footage. It would not be the first time when Russia is telling the lies, right? So let's wait and see. I think we'll need just a couple of days to get more information and see what happens. I do trust our military, and I think they're telling the truth.
So Ukraine, just to clarify, just on that one, Ukraine stands by its news report that he is dead, the commander of the Black Sea Fleet.
From what we know right now, yes.
OK. Talk to me more generally about what is happening in the country. I was reading an article, one of my team pointing out to me that your army has only liberated about 1/4% of the territory that Russia occupied in June. How are you going to win this war?
Well, Kay, I think, first of all, the year is not over. And you've been to Ukraine many times, and you know that things may be very unpredictable. And when we are looking to the last year and how the actions were conducted, there were many under-the-hood actions during the summer. And then the really major victories happened later in the year, later in winter, in late autumn. For example, Kherson was liberated late autumn. So we still have a month and a half of fighting. We wish our military well. We know there has been many preparations to some active actions. And also, President Zelensky just recently announced that some of the equipment, Abrams tanks, just arrived to Ukraine, so there should be a very good support. Of course, we have incredibly high hopes on the F-16 fighter jets that are to arrive to us, unfortunately, only at the beginning of the next year. But that should be a significant add-ons, significant change in our ability to defend ourselves and also to fight back.
So from what you're saying, the fact that there's only about 6 weeks more fighting before the weather changes for the worse, this war is going to go into next year?
It seems so, yes.
And how does that make you and your colleagues, and indeed the Ukrainian people, feel? How can you not be war-weary?
Well, we have no other choice. It is our land. These are our people. We cannot give up on the idea of liberating all our territories, freeing all our people, and making sure that we restore our sovereignty. We understand that it may take time, but you have no other option. What option can you have? We all have seen what is happening to people at the occupied territories. We have seen the results of the tortures, the mass graves. I personally have observed them. And it is not something that you can say, OK, well, we will stop here and let them just live there, because we know what is happening to our people there. You cannot accept this.
In the meantime, what's happening to your economy? It's shrunk by 1/3. How do you start to re-attract investment?
If we get enough of the air defense systems, we will be able to say with more assurance that some areas are safe. We have seen that there were no attacks on the far western territories of Ukraine, so it is easier to get people in. Also, we understand that many are waiting for the war to end, but we again cannot afford that. We need the rebuild. We need companies to come in right now with saying that there are high risks indeed, but the output would be also high.
Rishi Sunak as reliable as Boris Johnson as far as Ukraine is concerned?
We still believe that it is not on Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, that it is on British people. And I've been here for 2 days, and I cannot begin to tell you, Kay, how many times people were pulling me on the streets at the meetings and saying about Ukrainians that they have in their homes, about the support that they personally have given. I am truly persuaded it's not on the politicians, though thank you to them. It's on British people, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Good to see you, Kira. Take care. Keep well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Agnes will move in today. Strong winds, heavy rain, bringing the risk of disruption. Already quite windy in the west, with rain moving across Ireland and Wales, but most other places are fine with early fog lifting. The rest of the morning will see rain extending across Northern Ireland and other western fringes of Britain. Expect some heavy downpours with localised flooding extremely possible.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Stephen, standing by for us in Waterford. Hi, Stephen. What's it like where you are?
Yeah, can't you tell? Welcome to the sunny southeast of Ireland. This is quite a well-known surfing town here, Tramore in County Waterford. And the status orange rain and wind warnings have now kicked in across Southern Ireland in 3 counties anyway, Cork, Kerry and here in County Waterford. It's been in effect since 9 o'clock. It's pretty bad here. It has intensified a great deal over the last hour or so, and this isn't even the worst of it. We're not expecting the worst of Storm Agnes to hit southern parts of Ireland here until mid-afternoon or so. It's a status yellow, so officially people are not being told to stay indoors. Businesses are still open here. We're watching people dog walking in this, if you can believe that. But the Gardaí, the police service here in Ireland, as well as coastal authorities, are urging people really to try and avoid any sort of unnecessary sort of journey over the next few hours as the worst of this storm begins to move in over the southeastern part of Ireland where we are here, and then hitting, of course, Wales, Northern Ireland, where there's also a Met Office yellow warning in effect for wind for most of the day. But as you can see, it is getting a lot worse, and we've been told the worst is yet to come here.
OK, that teaches you, being out in the rain, for being cheeky to me. I'm going to ask you another question now, just to rub salt in the wound. How long do you think the weather's going to be bad for?
Most of the day it's going to be pretty horrible, I think, in most parts of Britain and Ireland. As I said, we're being told really that the worst impact, this sort of weather here, as it moves across the southeast of Ireland, is probably going to be maybe around lunchtime or thereabouts. The warnings here in Ireland are in effect until 3 p.m. and then 5 p.m. This evening. So the worst should be over by dinner time, but it's going to be pretty grim right through into the early evening at least.
OK, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. We'll teach you for being cheeky, Joe, won't it?
Exactly. Send him back there tomorrow. There's more rain tomorrow as well.
Leave him there for another hour. Talk to me about how bad it's going to get.
Yeah, so we've just heard that, Storm Agnes is moving in, affecting Ireland first, and then northern and western parts of the UK are going to see those strong winds. So, yes, we'll see gusts up to 50, 60 miles per hour, but exposed coastal areas could see something up to 80 miles per hour. So strong winds and then heavy rain as well. And there were warnings in place by the Met Office. These are the Met Office warnings. There's a yellow wind warning covering much of the UK, and then heavy rainfall warnings covering southern parts of Scotland. They may issue one for Northern Ireland. We'll see, have to look at the rainfall amount, so it's worth keeping an eye on that. But certainly Ireland, Northern Ireland and southern Scotland seeing some heavy rain as well.
Yeah, and the reason that we didn't see the yellow over Ireland is because it's a different weather system.
Different agencies. So, yes, they've got warnings in place as well, and they actually have the orange alert across southern counties of Ireland there, where they're expecting the biggest impact. There we go. There's the image there. You can see that there. Those southern counties, that's where they'll see the biggest impact from wind and rain through the course of today.
OK, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Oh, we talked about Mick Jagger, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
Oh, I found a song.
Oh,
I'm taking credit for it. Actually, my dad found a song.
Hello, Dad.
Give me shelter. Apparently the first line is a storm is threatening. So I thought that's perfect for today. Yeah?
Oh, you told me I could have organised, but you didn't.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. What about this one instead?
I was getting what you want, but if you try sometime, it just might find, it just might find you what you need.
Why are we talking about the Rolling Stones? Well, Mick Jagger has revealed who might benefit from the Rolling Stones back catalogue. It is not his children. He suggested the post-1971 tracks, one of the most prestigious music collections in the world, may be given to charity rather than being sold for a large sum of money. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, he said his kids don't need $500 million to live well. There we go. Top stories for you this morning. MPs have warned mental health support for children struggling to attend school is grossly inadequate as the number of absences since the pandemic doubles. The UK's largest untapped oil and gas field has been given the green light by the government's North Sea Transition Authority, defying climate warnings. Labour's Shadow Business Secretary told the programme the party would not revoke the licence. More than 100 people have been killed in a fire at a wedding in northern Iraq, which started during the couple's first dance. They are thought to be safe. Still to come in the final half hour of the programme this morning, 5 Labour mayors issue a joint plea to the PM not to scrap parts of HS2. We'll hear from them. Hello again, everybody. Christian is here. Christian was here yesterday, of course, talking about HS2. He's an expert on the subject, railways in particular, HS2 more generally, and of course, Mari's been with us all morning. The reason they've joined us again is because 5 Labour MPs are, I should say mayors, forgive me, including that man, Sadiq Khan, are gathering in Leeds as we speak. Why?
They're gathering in Leeds because they are trying to implore the government, Rishi Sunak, not to scrap the northern leg of HS2 between Birmingham and Manchester. It's been widely reported that the government are planning on scrapping it, and they know that there's been a lot of warnings from business leaders in the north saying that that will negatively impact them and negatively impact the northern economy.
OK. Scrapping HS2, we talked about that yesterday. You were never in favour of it to start with.
No, but I don't think you can now cut it off and leave this sort of Old Oak Common to Birmingham shuttle service.
Well, you made that more snappy yesterday.
Yes, Acton to Aston.
There we go.
And I think that, you know, that's just not viable. So, unfortunately, you have to keep on spending money. Now, oddly enough, these mayors are meeting in Leeds, which has already been cut off, right? If you then cut off Manchester, you really kind of negate any kind of point of this line whatsoever. So all the money that's been spent will effectively be wasted because it won't be worth going from London to Birmingham with this line when you've got perfectly good existing services.
Because you'd have to go out to Acton to start with.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You'd
and
have
so it's going to take longer than it would have.
It would take about the same amount of time, but much more hassle rather than hopping on the train at Euston. So it will be a completely useless line. And the problem is they can't really stop building it because there are these huge structures that are littered around the Chilterns, you know, 10-mile-long tunnels, viaducts, all this kind of stuff. And you can't just abandon all that. So they are really between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, the Prime Minister unlikely to make an announcement on this week, given that it's party conference next week. I'm guessing he's not going to go up by train.
I think that would be highly unlikely, considering most of the trains are cancelled due to strikes or engineering works.
And I wonder why the strikes are.
Yes, exactly.
Timing
we know the
is
timing
everything.
is interesting, isn't it, Kay? Yeah, I think you're right. Party conference in Manchester, I think scrapping the northern leg of HS2 before that would be a terrible idea politically. I think from what kind of sources are telling Sky News, the expectation is it's more likely to come a bit further on into the autumn, ahead of the autumn statement. But, you know, you never know. But I think that would be quite a very politically damaging and dangerous decision to try and scrap it ahead of party conference.
I do think the mayors, Labour mayors, should have got the odd Tory mayor, like the mayor of West Midlands or whatever, along with them, because this should be presented as a cross-party thing. Because there's a lot of Tories opposed to this.
Yeah, Andy Street was one of them, definitely. Tory mayor of the West Midlands. He's absolutely furious, very concerned about it.
He's really angry about it.
I was looking in the papers, actually, this morning. The chief exec of, the outgoing chief executive of HS2, £676,000 last year was his salary, including a £30,000 bonus. One wonders what that might have been for.
No, I think this is one of the problems. Rishi Sunak has actually, I think, mentioned this, the high salaries of some of the staff. But, you know, it's trivial compared to the huge amounts that's been spent on engineering. My view is that actually maybe they should pause this northern leg, look at the cost, try and get at some sort of cheaper version of this, kind of cut back on the gold plating. A bronze-plated line might be perfectly all right.
What would that look like?
Well, it might be that it interweaves with the existing lines, more like the high-speed lines in Germany. You know, you find yourself on a high-speed train and then it pops along on a bit that isn't high-speed and then it pops back to the high-speed bit. That sort of compromise, rather than kind of creating this 400-kilometre-per-hour massive train all the way through. There are ways of saving costs.
Okay.
Fewer tunnels, fewer viaducts, simpler line.
OK, so just in case you're just joining us, these are 5 Labour mayors who've got together a unified plan. They want to appeal to the Prime Minister to think again about any suggestions that HS2 could in some way not make its way from London, which is why Sadiq Khan is there, to Manchester, which is why Andy Burnham is there. In between, Oliver Coppard, Mayor of South Yorkshire, Steve Rotheram, Mayor of Liverpool, and Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire, although we know the right-hand side of the Y leg is not going to go ahead.
Yes, the leg to Leeds.
And they're gathering in Leeds, which is...
Yeah, so originally it was going to go to Leeds. Then there was some speculation about whether if Labour were to, you know, go ahead with HS2 in full, as they say they would in theory, depending on the fiscal situation they inherit, would they then take that all the way to Leeds? And they said they would take it all the way to Leeds. But again, this is all reliant on what they say is what they inherit financially and fiscally. So it's a half promise. It's a promise in pencil, really. already from the Labour Party?
Well, I think Labour has got a real problem here because this thing is eating up money. You know, they're going to spend £7 billion on it. I've seen the accounts. They don't actually announce this publicly. That's one of the problems with this scheme, is that we know so little about it. If you look at the minutes of the board meetings online, it's full of black redactions. You know, there is no openness about this. If you ask ministers how much it's going to cost, they won't tell you. So I think what Labour has to do, if it gets into power, is actually have a good look at this project and try and make it more transparent, try and cut costs, and try and salvage what they can out of it. But it's going to eat money anyway. And I think Labour is going to face a real issue over this because they'll want to build hospitals, they'll want to build schools, they'll want to do all the other things that they're promising to do. And this thing is going to eat up vast amounts of money.
Sure, hoping to speak to all of the mayors. The reason that they haven't started speaking yet is because Steve Rotheram, the mayor of Liverpool, is a little bit late. Perhaps his train was late, I don't know.
I'm sure it was.
We didn't get confirmation from Labour this morning that they would back HS2. They would continue on with HS2 in full if they win the next election.
Yes, exactly. We still don't know for sure what their exact commitment to HS2 is. It's all very much reliant on what the government does. And we're seeing that in a lot of policy areas with the Labour Party. We're seeing essentially the Labour Party saying, well, we want to do X, Y and Z, but it depends on what we inherit. Well, actually, we don't want to do that, but we're not going to revoke what the government has done. So we've seen that with HS2. We've also seen that with the two-child benefit cap. They say that they're against it, but they won't revoke it. The same thing with the Rosebank programme off the coast of Shetland that was just breaking this morning on your show, Kay. Again, they say they're against new oil and gas licences, but they won't revoke that either. And this is the same thing happening with HS2, is they say they're committed to it in full, but at the same time, they're not actually committing 100% to these Labour mayors this morning that they can 100% guarantee it will go up to Manchester or Leeds.
I'm going to do that thing, if I may, that broadcasters should never do because you know what will happen. But because there's a small delay, I'm going to risk taking a short commercial break. Here we go.
Derna itself has initially had about 30,000 displaced people. So what we mean is people who have actually literally lost their homes and are now staying in temporary shelters. That's gone down to about 20,000, but they've moved out to other areas because Derna is pretty inhospitable at the moment. The infrastructure is very bad there. We were actually told by the Minister of Health when I was there in Derna that they need psychosocial support. The trauma that has been faced, not just by the affected populations, but by the hospital staff. So key doctors and nurses lost their lives. Thankfully, Libyan expertise, medical expertise has come in from all over the country, but they're lacking in basic supplies, including fresh water as well. Severe storm, and that affected the north-eastern coast of Libya. I was actually flying in on that day, and the airports were closed. It affected the east the most. Benghazi is the second biggest city in Libya. However, in Derna, there were 2 dams that collapsed, and that led to the catastrophic loss of life and displacement of people. You have an internationally recognised government in the west, in Tripoli, the Government of National Unity, and you have another opposing government in the east, Government of National Stability. This moment of tragedy seems to have brought both governments together. So the Government of National Unity has actually established a National Emergency Committee, and the government in the east has put aside funding to really work on providing the resources that are needed. So I think there's a rare moment of coalescence here where the tragedy has brought people together, the people of Libya together.
It's like Emirates. It's like better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Christian and Mari Aster with us. Pictures coming to us from Leeds. We are waiting to hear from 5 Labour mayors. They are going to appeal to the Prime Minister to consider not scrapping the northern part of HS2. When I say that, I mean the left-hand side of the Y, because the right-hand side of the Y has already been cancelled on its way up to Leeds. Of course, nothing has been confirmed as yet, but the suggestion is that the Prime Minister will announce the scrapping of the northern part of HS2 in the coming weeks. You've been talking to the front bench, Christian, of the Labour Party. What are they saying?
Well, it's interesting because for the past 18 months or something, Louise Haigh, who's the Shadow Transport Secretary, has always told me, no, we're absolutely committed to this. We're going to do it in full, although they don't quite explain what that means because there's lots of bits that have been chopped off, and do they mean those bits as well? But they've been saying, we're absolutely going to do this. And now it's very clear from the past couple of weeks that we've had Pat McFadden, who's actually retreated a bit on it, and they've said, no, we're going to still go ahead. But as you said, it's not 100% anymore. It's kind of, well, we'll probably do that as long as there's money available and, we can cope with it and so on. So I somewhat suspect they'll take a good look at this and think, well, OK, we might do this bit or that bit, but we're not actually going to do the whole thing. But they can't say that because obviously they would then lose some of their support in the north where they want to get all those red wall seats back.
Do they have a fair point that they can't do the housekeeping until they know what the figures are, Labour, should they win the next election?
To an extent, they do. Because to an extent, we know what can happen in a short space of time. Remember Liz Truss, for instance, that did change the course of the kind of economic trajectory of the UK. And therefore, they do have a point to an extent. This is not surprising that ahead of an election, they don't want to put all their cards on the table. They don't want the Tories stealing all of their ideas or finding ways to kind of rebut their ideas very quickly. So there is an argument for holding back, for waiting and watching and waiting to see what the government does in this in the autumn statement and maybe even in the spring statement. But also what's interesting is the government continue to moan about speculation. They're moaning that this is all speculation. There's speculation maybe the North could be compensated in some way if the northern leg is cancelled instead.
Or maybe they're flying a kite, some might say.
Exactly, right? So there's all this speculation. But the easiest way for Number 10 to get rid of that speculation would be just to say, don't worry, it's going ahead.
Yeah.
But they won't. And that is fueling that speculation, creating that vacuum that obviously then fills with more speculation.
Yeah. So we are seeing Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire, hearing what she has to say. Oliver Coppard, Mayor of South Yorkshire. The Mayor of London, that is Sadiq Khan. He's travelled up to show unity. And to that end, Tracy Brabin saying Sadiq coming here is hugely important and significant, showing solidarity with the northern mayors. Andy Burnham there as well, of course, he's been very vocal against the Prime Minister. Gathered together, they want to put pressure on the Prime Minister to say, don't even think about scrapping the northern leg of HS2. Waiting to hear from Steve Rotheram. That's why they have not yet approached the microphone. Steve Rotheram, the Mayor of Liverpool. He should know that if you're not early, you're late. Anyway, we're still waiting to hear from them. Do you think it will make any difference? Is there precedent for this?
This is a whole kind of crazy piece of politics on the part of the Tory party. Why did they kick off this speculation, just as they're about to kind of have a conference in Manchester? It seems really strange. And I think maybe they're trying to kind of put Labour on the spot here. And that's one possible explanation of why they've done this. And so exactly now Labour are going to have to respond to this. And they might be pushed in something of a corner because, as you said, they haven't quite committed themselves to doing this. And yet, on the other hand, they've got all these constituencies up there they want to win. So they want to kind of win over people. So my only thesis about this is that they've actually done this to kind of put Labour on the spot. And that's exactly why these 5 mayors have, trotted up to Leeds to try and bat for this scheme and yet not 100% commit themselves to it.
Should they not have made this non-party political? as the mayors start to move inside, and got some Conservative MPs or mayors involved as well.
I think that might have been a better choice. We know, for instance, Andy Street, the West Midlands mayor, has been very vocal about how he really wants HS2 to go ahead. He says the business case is strong. He hopes and prays the business case will kind of persuade the government to go ahead with it. But I think, to an extent, the Labour mayors banding together to an extent makes it a party political issue where they can say, look at the Tories trashing the record, trashing promises, and we are over here trying to save these promises that are going to help the North. So to an extent, the other option would be actually, by keeping themselves separate from Tory mayors, it keeps it very much a kind of big dividing line issue. And I think Labour feel that actually, as you were saying, you know, the Tories might feel, you know, we can bring this fight to Labour. Labour are going to have a position on this. The other fight, the other kind of flip side of that is actually that means that the Tories now have to answer more and more questions about something that they don't know what they're doing about, and it risks looking incompetent. It risks looking like they are flip-flopping, which is something they like to accuse Keir Starmer of.
Okay. What might they be able to say? What do you think the government of the day would have to hear in order for this to be extended?
Well, you know, one of the really odd things about this is, do we ever get anybody on your programme or any other programme really defending HS2? You know, do we get Mark Thurston, who you mentioned earlier, who was the chief executive, who was on nearly £700,000 a year? Did we ever really see him on the programmes kind of defending it and whatever? So I think if Labour kind of gets behind this scheme, they have to do it in a much more public way. They have to say, this is an enormous benefit, why we're doing this and so on. And indeed, when you talk about the cost, OK, the cost is very high, but a lot of that money goes back into the economy. A lot of that money is employing people who might otherwise be on the dole. So it's not as if all this money is totally wasted. You know, we're getting a railway line out of it, and we also get a lot of employment. And somebody needs to actually say that. We need people to defend this scheme. I mean, it's a very bizarre thing about this scheme, which I've followed for the last, 15 years, it started in 2009, is that nobody ever defends it.
OK, just hearing as we're chatting that Lawrence Fox, after his rant yesterday about a young journalist, has been taken off air by GB News until further notice. Lots of complaints to Ofcom, and we did hear from GB News, who said they were very unhappy by what had happened and they apologised profusely. Let's wait and see what happens there as they pose for this photograph. All five mayors there are all mayors of Labour persuasion. Andy Burnham, very local and vocal. Tracy Brabin there as well. Different angle for you. The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is there as well, carrying their ticket.
Yes, save our HS2, save Northern Powerhouse Rail, save Euston. That's their kind of campaign slogan, as it were, to try and persuade the government to go ahead with this. What's really interesting is Rishi Sunak is trying to brand himself as a long-term planner. His kind of new ethos is, long-term decisions for the better of the country, even if they are politically dangerous or politically difficult. Now, many people might ask themselves, how is scrapping the northern line of the northern part of HS2 going to be good for the long-term prospects of the country? Yes, it might be very expensive now, but actually in the long term, will it bring, as you were saying, prosperity to the north and better connections between the north and the south, which will make a huge difference to what some people would say is, the north is often left behind and often underinvested in. So it's interesting that the kind of ethos of Rishi Sunak, some would say, isn't quite chiming with policy decisions.
OK, I can just see Fraser Maud was there shaking hands with the Londoner, trying to get him on the show. Let's see what happens. We're off air in about 3 minutes' time. So if you could get a wiggle on, that would be great, Mr. Khan. He has travelled up, I'm not sure whether he went by train or not, up to Leeds in order to show support for the Labour mayors who have gathered there in Leeds. Even though the line is not going to Leeds anymore at this stage, Labour won't say if it will, if they get into power, come the next election, whenever that might be. We had Lord Archer on the programme yesterday. He thinks it's going to be October or November of next year, so we'll have to wait and see when that might be. What will Labour do if they do win the next election? He travelled up, as I said, from London today to Leeds. He's going to be speaking with the other mayors. What does he say in the meantime? Mr. Mayor, it's good to see you. Why did you feel it necessary to travel to Leeds this morning?
Well, I'm really privileged, I feel, to be invited by the cross-party Transport for North board to meet with them to discuss our concerns around government plans to cut high speed 2. We're mayors from different regions, but I think we speak with one voice when we say it's really important to continue to invest in high speed 2. It's important for, of course, London and the South East and economic growth, having a high speed 2 line coming to the centre of our city rather than 6 miles to the west. But it's incredibly important for the West Midlands, the East Midlands and the North. You simply will not get levelling up without investment in high quality transport infrastructure.
Yeah. Do you think the Prime Minister's going to take any notice of you?
Well, I think he has to, not just what we're saying as cross-party mayors from across the country, but business leaders, communities and others as well. Here's an irony. The new high-speed line from Birmingham to the centre of London will be slower because it will stop at Eldart Common than the current line from Birmingham to Euston. That makes no sense at all. When you bear in mind at Euston, we have a construction site where homes have been demolished, businesses have been destroyed, communities feel let down. That construction site could become permanent if the government carries on with its plans to cancel
Mr. Mayor,
Central
we are
London
out of
Station
time.
in
I'm going to
London.
have to interrupt you there. I blame the Mayor of Liverpool. He was late. It's good to talk to you. Thank you. We've hit the buffers. It's Wilfred next. See you soon.